Google's cloud business? How does it fit into the competitive landscape?
I mean, just to put numbers, it's a $40 billion run rate business now. So compare it to Amazon AWS at $100 billion, and Microsoft Azure is $76 billion. Okay. So these are like-for-like comparisons. And look, it's growing at a very healthy 25% clip, but it should actually accelerate for Street to be happy with that segment.
Do they monetize the AI stuff in their cloud?
Yes, so that's the Google Cloud segment is the infrastructure segment. Then there is the ad side, because the core business is still search. That's what drives the bulk of the profits. And what you don't want to see is search getting cannibalized from, Perplexity or some of these new LLMs, whether it's ChatGPT or any of the other ones that we talk about. So search, we think, will remain insulated, but it's not going to grow more than low teens. So it's more about search maintaining profits. You don't want to see a dent in their profit margins from the search business, but the real top-line drivers will be cloud and YouTube. Don't forget YouTube. It's an amazing business when you compare it to the likes of Netflix. And, ad side, we are expecting high teens growth for YouTube. And then YouTube subscriptions has been very solid. In fact, they quantified it's a $15 billion run rate business growing at a very healthy 23% last quarter.
Did they ever think about spinning out YouTube as a separate business company?
I mean, if they were to spin it out, I think it will be easily twice of Netflix's current valuation. I would be surprised, yes.
See, that's what
How
I'm
do you
talking
get
about.
that? How?
Well, because when you compare Netflix's growth, YouTube is growing faster, and YouTube in aggregate is over a $50 billion run rate business. So compare it to Netflix at around 30s, low 30s. So clearly, YouTube being a higher base is growing at a faster clip, so it deserves a premium multiple.
Nice.
Wow. How do you...
See, he could be an investment banker if he had
totally.
followed my advice. I mean, he'd be in there.
I mean, he's still young, so just give him time.
Okay.
Why is it not happening?
Well, I mean, I think for Google, they clearly have the economies of scale, right? So imagine your entire data center infrastructure running your search business, running your YouTube business, and generating revenue from the cloud segment. So you get the economies of scale. If YouTube was a standalone company, they would have to have their own data centers like Netflix does, and you need a separate kind of cost line just to sustain YouTube, whereas right now it's shared, and they benefit from all the innovation that Google and DeepMind and all the other segments within the company are doing.
What is Wiz, and why did Wiz reject Google's $23 billion offer?
So one of the things that Google is looking to do, I mean, remember, the cloud business is enterprise focused. The entire company is consumer focused. The search business, YouTube, it's all consumer focused. So Google Cloud, being an enterprise focused business, could make an acquisition for a company like Wiz without really kind of getting antitrust scrutiny.
Okay,
I mean,
that was gonna be the next question. Right.
I think that acquisition would have been easy, but the timing of it around the CrowdStrike outage hasn't helped them, because Wiz suddenly has become very popular.
Oh, I see.
If they were to go public, right now they would get a...
Because Wiz is like a cybersecurity?
It's a cybersecurity company that competes with CrowdStrike, and that has a better solution in the sense it's agentless. It will never have the problem that CrowdStrike had in terms of changing underlying Microsoft operating system behavior, because agentless solutions don't change...
What kind of solutions?
Agentless.
Agentless.
So they don't change the operating system kernel, which is what happened with CrowdStrike. It ended up changing Windows kernel behavior. And so there will be a preference for agentless solution.
I'm going to just believe him when he says that.
Yeah, I'm going to go with him on that.
So where might be the weak points when we get Google's numbers? And I'm literally taking notes, by the way, as Mandeep is talking, because I'm going to be breaking earnings at the close, and I want to just get that perspective. Like, where's going to be the weaker issues?
Margins. I mean, if your cost of revenue goes up because the cost of Google search goes up, think of all the chips that you need to procure, the NVIDIA chips that you need to buy to beef up your infrastructure. Suddenly the cost of search goes up tenfold because of NVIDIA chips costing so much. So the traditional cost of search is less than 0.02 cents. Now with GPT type of search, that cost goes up tenfold. So your gross margin comes down. So if Google was to miss on gross margins, it would be definitely because of search being more costly. And I don't think it's going to happen because the traditional search use case is still intact. They've rolled out Gemini as a separate subscription, so people are paying for that subscription, and that is offsetting the gross margin impact. But if you see a margin miss, it will be because of cost of search.
You've told us for the last 5-6 quarters that the bar for these big tech companies is really high in terms of their results and their forward guidance, and that if they were to miss, that could really be a problem given what's happened, how the stocks have performed so strongly. However, they've always hit the numbers and exceeded expectations. Does that risk just build going out? I mean, does it get even more and more of a risk, a higher and higher of a bar? I mean, at some point, one of these big companies is going to disappoint.
Yeah, and the valuation multiple comes into play just to assess that factor. So Google at 23 times forward earnings is still at a better spot than Microsoft at 35 times earnings, NVIDIA at 40 times earnings. So clearly valuation multiple has, in terms of that, there is a risk that you could disappoint because expectations are already high.
But we're not calling for that this quarter.
Not for Alphabet, because it's 23 times. So it's not, like Microsoft.
NVIDIA doesn't report till like the end of August.
Yeah,
and you
end
have
of
to wait a
August.
while.
But even Microsoft, like look at the gap between Microsoft and Alphabet. So I think the bar is higher for Microsoft than it is for Alphabet.
All right, thank you for the prep.
We can
I
blame
appreciate that.
Anurag Rana on that one. If Microsoft
Yeah, for sure.
misses.
Yeah, we can definitely do that. All right, Mandeep, thanks a lot. Super appreciate it. Mandeep Singh, Bloomberg Intelligence,
lot of
senior
note-taking
tech
there.
industry analyst. Well, because when you read previews, if you're not like steeped in the tech world
Right.
and the verbiage, you're like, what does this even mean?
But
And
at
he's
4
the guy
o'clock,
who can break it down.
You got to break it.
We got to break it. And we
Yep.
got to know what it actually means. And
Yep.
he's the guy who can help me do that. And then I want to know him later. So it kind of just works out all
good.
across the board. We got much more coming up here on this Tuesday. Just taking a look here at where the markets are. We're not really doing much. The Dow's just down by 0.1%. The Nasdaq's flat. The S&P 500 is also flat. Volume is a little light despite the fact we have such a heavy earnings day on this Tuesday.
company news headlines on Bloomberg Radio.
And I'm John Tucker in the Bloomberg Newsroom with a look at some of the company stories we're following. Let's start with Google and cookies. Google says it plans to give people who use its Chrome web browser the option to choose a more privacy-sensitive experience rather than phasing out cookies. So this is a pretty major shift for Google. For years, they've worked to implement Privacy Sandbox, the plan to replace cookies with other tools for advertisers. In a blog post, the company saying it made the decision after considering the impact that eliminating cookies would have on publishers, advertisers, and others involved in the sprawling digital ad business. Instead of removing the cookies from Chrome, it's going to introduce a user choice prompt. Cookies, as you know, for the uninitiated, looking at you, Michael Barr, are used by publishers and advertisers to track users and measure the success of their ad campaigns. I didn't know that either. When you fly commercially in the future, your plane may also be a big working laboratory. The U.S. government and United Airline Holdings will use a commercial aircraft to monitor greenhouse gases throughout the atmosphere. First of its kind collaboration, the United agreement could eventually lead to widespread greenhouse gas monitoring by commercial aircraft. And finally, Mattel announcing today the addition of a blind Barbie doll and a black Barbie doll with Down syndrome. The company says they're created to allow even more kids to find a doll that represents them and inspire all kids to tell their stories through play. The doll comes with a white and red cane, the blind Barbie, and an identifiable marshmallow tip. It includes stylish and functional sunglasses for the kids to use along with the Barbie doll. And that is a look at some of the company news we're following today.
This is Bloomberg Intelligence with Alex Steele and Paul Sweeney on Bloomberg Radio.
Happy Tuesday, everybody. I'm Alex Steele alongside John Tucker and Paul Sweeney. Welcome to Bloomberg Intelligence Radio. We cover all the top news you need in business and finance and economics right here in our Interactive Broker studio in Midtown Manhattan. Also check us on YouTube. Also check out Michael Barr. He's here with world and national news. Michael?
Thank you very much, Alex, Paul, and John. Secret Service Director Kimberly Cheadle resigned after an assassination attempt against former President Trump at a rally. Yesterday, Cheadle was grilled before a House committee about what went wrong and angered many House members by not answering questions. Also yesterday, Republican lawmakers visited the site in Butler, Pennsylvania, where the gunman tried to assassinate former President Trump. House Homeland Security Chair Mark Green of Tennessee.
If you're an elite unit, which the Secret Service should be, that's what happens when you screw up. You're fired, and she needs to go.
Members from both sides of the aisle called for Cheadle to resign. Vice President Kamala Harris has secured the support of enough Democratic delegates to become her party's nominee against Donald Trump. Harris sealed her status as the presumptive nominee Monday night after crossing the magic number of 1,976 pledged delegates. Bloomberg's Jody Schneider in Washington reports Harris has raised a boatload of cash.
The campaign is saying it raised more than $100 million between Sunday afternoon when President Biden announced he was exiting the race and through Monday evening, and that includes more than 1.1 million unique donors over that time span, 62% of whom were first-time contributors.
Bloomberg's Jody Snyder reports Harris travels today to Milwaukee, Wisconsin for a campaign stop. Meanwhile, Donald Trump's running mate J.D. Vance held a rally in Radford, Virginia, and Vance went after the current administration.
We'll fight to bring down the cost of groceries and housing. Isn't it a shame that our young people can't afford to buy a home in Joe Biden and Kamala Harris's economy?
J.D. Vance went on to say, while Biden is one of the worst presidents ever, Kamala Harris is a million times worse. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it. With Bloomberg News Now, I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg. Alex, Paul, and John.
All right, thanks so much, Michael Barr. So here was an interesting piece from the Financial Times talking about the Paris Olympics. So apparently, if you wanted to go to the Summer Olympics, you had to buy a block of tickets for 3 separate events during the first wave of sales. And the organizers said, look, if you don't want those tickets later, you can resell them through the official channel. But now there's been a lack of demand in that secondary market, and now a lot of people are left holding tickets they can't sell while organizers keep releasing even more tickets. And tickets must be resold at face value, so there is no sort of discount mechanism on that. That's quite interesting.
That is. The number of listings rose to 271,000 on Tuesday, up from about 180,000 a month ago. A Financial Times analysis of the official retail site shows the most expensive offers on the resale site are for the opening ceremony, with the best price seats at just under 3,000 euros. So those tickets are always the demand, the opening ceremony, closing ceremonies. But
the opening ceremony, it's not going to be marching around a stadium. They're going to be on boats in the Seine, right?
Really?
Yeah.
Ah, interesting.
That is my understanding.
Yeah, I think so.
I would just think, Olympics, Paris, summer, can it be any better? And I'm sure it's going to be great, because I'm sure they've sold a gajillion tickets on this thing. I saw some numbers. So Paris 2024, the committee said its approach to ticket sales has been, quote, a major success, pointing to 8.85 million sold or allocated so far, an Olympics record. About 250,000 tickets had been exchanged via the resale site the organizers added. So there's a lot of, there's so many events now. There's just 1 million tickets to go around.
Well, apparently, if you still want to make the opening ceremony on the Seine, about 4,000 tickets available, beginning at 900 euros. So, we can get on, John Tucker's private jet and just, make it on over there.
Hey, sure.
For
Road
us.
trip.
We're going to see that flotilla of
Why
boats
not?
will ferry athletes down the Seine.
More than 1 million tickets are still available on the eve of the 2016 Rio de Janeiro Games.
So this is better, I guess.
Yes, this is better.
Yeah, and that Olympics didn't go so
Paris,
well.
there's 1 million things you can do.
1 million things. All right, just some information here. The Washington Post is reporting that President Biden will give a speech on withdrawing from the presidential race that will be set for Wednesday. And we have a lot more coming up within the next hour. We're going to talk about oil with Liberty Energy CEO.
This is Bloomberg Intelligence with Alex Steele and Paul Sweeney.
The real outperformance has been the U.S. corporate high yield.
Are the companies lean enough? Have they trimmed all the fat?
The semiconductor business is a really cyclical business.
Breaking market headlines and corporate news from across the globe.
Do investors like the M&A that we've seen?
These are two big-time blue-chip companies.
The window between the peak and cut changing super fast.
Bloomberg Intelligence with Alex Steele and Paul Sweeney on Bloomberg Radio.
All right, coming up in this hour, we're going to kick off the hour, talk to our good buddy Alex Summanover to get thoughts on what's happening in the markets today. Chris Wright, CEO of Liberty Energy. Oh, an energy company. Surprise, surprise. We're going to talk about what's happening under either a Trump or a Harris president. What does it mean for the energy biz? And then Lee Klaskow, Bloomberg Intelligence. He covers all the logistics companies, and that includes UPS. Disappointing numbers. Stock getting crushed today. Let's check it out with Lee Klaskow. But let's start off this hour like we do with Mr. John Tucker in a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, the major stock averages, right now they've turned mixed to little change. Some of the earlier gains, they've just kind of evaporated. And it's helpful to look at the Russell 2000 of smaller cap stocks. That is actually leading the indexes, so maybe some of that rotation that we saw last week, but still in effect, the pressure there remaining. Alphabet and Tesla, of course, as we've been telling you all day long, reporting after the close of regular trading. Expectations overall this earnings season generally high. Analysts are forecasting the strongest profit growth for S&P 500 companies since late 2021. Meantime, Robert Teeter at Silvercrest Asset Management does see some stocks as right now being priced for perfection.
Most of the fundamentals look pretty good across the board. Earnings seem okay. Economy seems okay. But the valuation piece is what gives me a little bit of pause here. So forward PE on the S&P of about 20 as we enter earnings season sort of sets the stage for if anybody has a significant miss in any of the important areas, a little bit of a risk here for a correction.
And you're going to take a deeper dive into this in just a bit, but UPS shares 13% lower after delivering weaker profit and revenue for the spring quarter than what analysts were looking for. S&P 500, 5 points higher, up 0.1%, 5570 on the index. The Dow Jones Industrial Average, 24 points lower. The NASDAQ 100 right now down 16 points. That's down just about 0.1%. And your oil quote, NYMEX crude, West Texas, that is down 1.75%, 77.04. It was like 3.25 filling up at the Wawa.
Okay.
So, I mean, it's going in the right direction. We check the markets for you all day long, right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker. That's your Bloomberg Business Flash, Paul and Alex.
All right. Thanks so much, John Tucker. I was 378 in Brooklyn over the weekend. So.
Well, it's Brooklyn. I mean, what?
Go to California, you're still paying all those taxes.
Yeah, that's a whole different story. We're going to talk about oil in just a moment, but we want to get more details on some of the movers here. Alexander Semenova joins us from Bloomberg. You're looking at Philip Morris International. That stock's up almost 2%.
Indeed,
what's up,
Alex? So lots of things driving moves in markets today. They reported earnings and they raised their forecast for annual profit growth. They cited a higher demand for their Zyn nicotine patches. They are apparently all the rage right now among young people, especially.
It's really good for earnings when you sell a product that's addictive.
Right. Well, apparently these patches, they don't have some of the chemicals that cigarettes have that are linked to cancer, but a lot of people are concerned about how addictive they are, especially among the Gen Z age group. A lot of younger people really relying on them, but it's doing well for the company. They have been, struggling, of course, as tobacco gets less popular, but they expect that sales of Zyn will reach as high as 580 million cans. That is up from their previous guidance on the product, and that also helped them boost their full-year forecast for earnings growth.
You know what's cool? You look at the PGEO function on the Bloomberg terminal, and you click on by geography, where they get their revenue for Philip Morris. About 38% from Europe, 30%, that's Western Europe, 30% from, I guess, Eastern Europe and all that kind of stuff. 17% from EA, Australia. It's just weird. And the Americas, 5%.
Wow.
Well, yeah.
5%.
Chinese Europeans. That's what happens. It's when you go to Europe and you're like, oh, wait, I forgot. People smoke all the time. You're also looking at Krispy Kreme, if we just stay on the consumer-y theme.
Exactly. Moving from tobacco to donuts now. Shares of Krispy Kreme paired some of their gain earlier this morning. They were up as much as 5.5%, but just about flat right now. This is after they got an upgrade to buy from hold at HSBC. They had sold their stake in Insomnia Cookies, which is a late-night seller of cookies, to two private equity firms. And analysts at HSBC said that this was good for deleveraging. They also cited their partnership with McDonald's from earlier this year and said that that helped them improve their operating outlook. But they did keep their price target on the company at $14. Shares closed at $10.71 on Monday.
$1.8 billion market cap, really small here. I was just wondering. Now, do you have a preference, Krispy Kreme versus Dunkin' Donuts? Do you have a brand loyalty?
I don't think so. I mean, I get coffee in Dunkin' Donuts sometimes.
Do you like Dunkin' Donuts coffee?
You do?
I do. I don't like donuts.
I like it more than Starbucks, actually. That's a controversial
thing. That's a thing. That's definitely a thing.
Yeah, I didn't know if people have the brand identity like Coke versus Pepsi, Dunkin' versus Krispy Kreme.
Well, yeah. I mean, donut's a donut.
Krispy Kreme is more niche, I guess. People come there specifically for the donuts. I guess in Dunkin' Donuts they have a bigger.
All right, fair enough. And last up, Kimberly Clark.
So that is the owner, of course, of Kleenex Tissues, among other brands. They reported quarterly sales that trailed estimates. And there were kind of two factors weighing on this. The first is that consumers have shifted back to something called the just-in-time stocking model. So people kind of buy things as they need them, compared to during the pandemic when people were loading up on tissues, on toilet paper, and that's, of course, hurting some of the retailers. And the second is that consumers are still very much feeling the pinch of inflation. They are going to cheaper alternatives, different labels, and of course, companies like Kimberly Clark can no longer raise their prices.
Yep, there we go. It's like we've reached that max price intake, and then it really becomes a top-line story, and then that becomes dicier. Alex, thanks a lot. Really appreciate it. Alexander Semenova joining us on some of the movers. So let's go to energy for a moment. There's a couple different threads here that we kind of want to unravel here. Oil is trading a little heavy again, down by almost 2%. We're now at 76.98 on WTI. Chris Wright is CEO of Liberty Energy. He's very outspoken when it comes to how he thinks oil policy should be, and we love that about him. Chris, we're going to get to that in a moment, but I wanted to understand what's happening with crude. It's had a real meltdown over the last couple of weeks, along with copper, along with aluminum and nickel and iron ore. What is this telling us right now?
Alex, I think it's fear of slowing economic growth ahead of us. Look, China's the biggest buyer of hard commodities. They're by far the biggest importer of oil. They're building big strategic storage reserves for all commodities, including oil. And so in China, you saw us cut interest rates recently. People are fearful of Chinese economic growth. If they slow down, that marginal buyer of oil and iron ore and copper is going to pull back a little bit. So oil prices are still around $80. I don't think they're in a bad place, but I think fear about economic growth and specifically fear about China is probably the cause of that.
Hey, Chris, in case maybe you didn't notice out there in Montana, but this is an election year. What is the energy industry? What do you and your energy industry pals, what do you think about, a Republican versus a Democratic administration here as it relates to your industry?
Look, I've been outspoken on my visits to Washington that the efforts of the current administration to make it harder to get a drilling permit or to get a pipeline or to drill on these lands, what does that do in effect? It just means we produce a little less oil and natural gas. It doesn't change demand at all. So it just pushes prices up. So look, our industry's been at record profitability. That's great for me. That's great for our industry, but that's not great for our country. If you have higher prices, it just makes people's lives a little bit tougher. And nothing the government does really impacts demand. Demand for hydrocarbons has grown at 1.6% compound annual growth rate for 50 years, a little faster than that in the last decade or two. So the presidents are not going to impact demand, but they are going to impact how much of that's produced in the United States and how much of that's produced overseas.
So here's my thing with that I don't quite understand, is that oil production in the U.S. is at a record high. It's higher than it was when President Trump was in office. So what's the problem?
It would be higher. But you're right. You're right. Look, most of the production's on private lands here, so there's still room to grow production. We are at record high. We'll continue to set record highs probably for another couple decades. The question's the pace at which U.S. production grows, and how does that compare to growth in global oil demand, which is a little 1 to 1.5 million barrels a day. During the boom years of the shale revolution, the U.S. production were growing as fast as global demand. That really keeps oil prices down. If U.S. oil production goes much slower than global oil demand, so other countries have to meet those incremental barrels, that's an upward push on prices. Good for our industry, but not necessarily great for the country.
Where are we as an industry in terms of the fracking evolution, if you will? Because it was such an amazing story to turn this country from a net importer to a net exporter. Where are we in that process?
I would say midstream, mid-innings. There's still a lot of technology improvement going on, but the low-hanging fruit in the first couple decades, most of that's been picked. So the rise in productivity is much slower these days. We're still getting better at making each well better, but of course you drill the best locations first. The rocks and oil, that give up oil and gas the easiest, most of those have been drilled. So we're drilling slightly lower quality rock, and we're trying to offset that by improving fracking technology. For many years, fracking technology outleaped the decline in rock quality. Now you're seeing a slight decline in the productivity of each well because that degradation in rock quality is running a little faster than technology. But, not a huge change. Mm-hmm. A lot of room to run for U.S. production.
So, Chris, if President Trump gets in the White House and he opens up all federal land to drilling, really sort of opens up things in Alaska, et cetera, if that really invites more production, then won't the oil price fall even more, which then doesn't that hurt the break even? So there's got to be some kind of middle ground.
Exactly. Look, the markets always find a balance. But there's no question, a Trump administration would make it easier to produce U.S. oil and gas. So our production would grow. You'd see some offsetting factors, though. We'd see faster permitting on LNG export terminals. So the U.S. exports of natural gas would grow. I think you'd likely also see more industry relocated in the United States. Like, our natural gas resources in this country are just awesome. But yet most of the energy-intensive manufacturing, think steel and cement and solar panels, that's done in China, and that's powered by coal. If you brought more of that industry back to the U.S., it would be powered by U.S. natural gas. You'd see lower air pollutant, lower greenhouse gas emissions, and more American jobs. So the Trump administration would certainly lead to more growth in U.S. oil and natural gas production, but it might also lead to more consumption, more domestic consumption of those products as well.
Chris, I'm looking at your balance sheet here. I'm not an industry analyst for energy. It looks really conservative to me, $460–70 billion of total debt. You got $1 billion of EBITDA, free cash flow positive. What do you do with that kind of dry powder, if you will?
Are you investment banker pitching him right now?
I am, because I'm thinking about I could do a lot of stuff with this balance sheet.
So, Chris, just so you know, Paul is a former investment banker for media. So, just set you up there.
I appreciate that, Paul. But yeah, we always keep a conservative balance sheet because, look, our industry is very cyclical. We've had 2 violent downturns that have both been opportunities for us to buy distressed but good companies at cheap prices. So we're always ready for a downturn to be aggressive. And also, you're seeing a degradation in the U.S. electricity market. Electricity is becoming more expensive and less reliable. That's very unfortunate for our country, another one of those bad energy policies. But it's an opportunity for Liberty to start selling electricity into the grid. We power our frac fleets, burning natural gas to generate electricity to power frac fleets. We can take that same electricity and sell it to data centers or towns that are struggling with an unstable grid. So I think you're going to see a broadening of the shoulders of Liberty's business, and we're going to deploy a lot of our excess cash flow into a new business line, and we'll continue to buy back our stock, of course. We still trade at a single-digit price-to-earnings ratio.
Chris, that's actually tremendously interesting because sort of the conversation that was emerging at CERAWeek this last year was, do energy companies need to rethink the kind of company that they are? That they can't just be a straight-up oil and gas producer. Do they have to sort of become power providers? And that's a different business. It's a different outlook. It's kind of rethinking the structure of what a business looks like. It sounds like you are deeper in those conversations than maybe some of your peers. Would that be true?
Yes, look, I think most will not, and most should not. Oil and gas is at an all-time record high market share for U.S. consumption. This sort of fears that oil and gas is going to be gone or demand will be gone in 20 or 30 years are just nonsense. So I don't think it's a necessary thing, but in our company, Liberty, we developed power production technologies, the highest thermal efficiency, meaning most of the energy from burning natural gas turns into electricity on the planet. So we have these mobile power plants we're using in the industry. We already developed that technology. Of course, we're going to go ahead and deploy it outside of the oil and gas industry.
Chris, do you have any appetite for being an acquirer of assets at this point?
Well, I would say we're mid-cycle, maybe a little below mid-cycle. We look at stuff all the time, but we only, we're mostly an organic builder. We only buy stuff if it's compelling. But, a different technology, a different business that maybe leveraged us faster into where we want to go, sure, we're open to that. We're always looking at opportunities.
And would that be in sort of the oil space to ramp up current positions? Would it be more to acquire some new technology, since we already talked about how current wells, not tapped out, but they're nearing that top out cycle? Would it be more natural gas? Would it be infrastructure? Would it be power?
Power is certainly a possibility. We're going that direction anyway. Might we buy a smaller player to speed that entry? That's a real possibility. Technology is something we always look at. We frack 20% of all the wells drilled in the U.S. and Canada. So, we're not really going to acquire to get market share. We're already the biggest, and I would say by a fair margin, the highest ranked quality provider in our space. So probably not in our core business, but certainly in peripheral businesses is possible.
All right, Chris, thanks so much for joining us. Really appreciate getting some of your time. Chris Wright, he's the CEO and chairman of the board of Liberty Energy. That's a publicly traded company. LBRT is the ticker. Stock's up about 15% year to date, so putting in some decent numbers. Got about equal number of buys versus holds on Wall Street. So the street's kind of mixed on that, which is probably true for energy in general.
Yeah. Also, see, here's the interesting part is that if you're a portfolio manager or a big investor, you can't own a lot of energy stocks. Like, you really can't anymore. So you have to really pick and choose which ones you're going to buy, which means the bigger have to get bigger. The mediums definitely have to get bigger. You have to really appeal to shareholders of why you're that one stock, which is why I also thought that his information about power was interesting too, because that's a totally different type of company and a different business line, and who would be good at that and who would not be. And that was definitely part of the conversation. Do these guys really need to rethink who they are fundamentally? fundamentally.
Right, and at $3.5 billion in market cap, are you a natural buyer of more assets or seller? And he says they're already roughly 20% of the fracking in this country, so probably not going to get much bigger in that line of business. So interesting to keep an eye on that company based in Texas. No, based in Denver, Colorado, actually.
There you go. It's in Colorado.
Yeah.
All right, good stuff. Much more coming up. We are going to have some information from the circuit with Emily Chang and Mark Zuckerberg.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And I'm John Tucker in the Bloomberg Newsroom for this Bloomberg Business Flash. Earnings in the driver's seat, and it is worth noting the 5 biggest U.S. tech companies are facing some pretty tough comparisons. Profits for the group projected to rise 29% in the second quarter. Strong, but that's still down for the past 3 quarters. United Parcel Service, which you could call something of an economic barometer, heading toward its biggest plunge on record. Profit there missing estimates. And then you have General Electric jumping on a pretty bullish outlook. S&P 500, 19 points higher. That's up 0.4%. The NASDAQ 100 now is up 78 points. That's up 0.4%. The Dow right now 45 points higher. That is up 0.1%. And we check the markets for you all day long right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker, and that is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Alex and Paul.
All right, John Tucker, thank you so much. We appreciate that. Alex Steele and Paul Sweeney live here in our Bloomberg Interactive Brokers studio, streaming live on that YouTube thing. Head over to youtube.com and search Bloomberg Podcast. Well, Meta CEO and founder Mark Zuckerberg has fired his latest salvo in the AI wars. Meta unveiled the largest open source AI model ever, dubbed Llama 3.1. The company is also updating its Meta AI services built as a rival to ChatGPT. In an exclusive interview with Bloomberg's Emily Chang, Zuckerberg opened up about his strategy and why he believes it's superior to competitors like OpenAI and Google. Let's take a listen.
So you're releasing Llama 3.1, this family of models, big and small, including the biggest open source model ever, 405 billion parameters. What does that jump unlock?
I actually think the main thing that people are going to do, especially because it's open source, is use it as a teacher to train smaller models that they use in different applications. If you just think about like all the startups out there, or all the enterprises, or even governments that are trying to do different things, they probably all need to, at some level, build custom models for what they're doing. And it's really hard to do that with closed systems out there, whether that's OpenAI or Gemini, Google's thing, or whatever. And this is like, gets to a pretty core part of our philosophy is we don't believe there's gonna be like one AI to rule them all. Our vision is that there's going to be millions or just billions of different models out there.
So not one God, but many? Is that the way to think about it?
Well, I don't think they're going to be gods, but I do think that to some degree, if you're like an organization and you think you're going to create like this one super intelligence, it does have this feel to me of like people trying to create a god, and that's just I find that both the wrong way to look at it, but just also very unappealing. You know, there's almost 200 million creators on our platforms. They all are trying to build their community. People want to interact with them. There aren't enough hours in the day. Like I want to make it so that every single one of them can easily train like an AI version of themselves that they can make it what they want. So it's almost like a kind of artistic artifact that they're putting out there for their community that allows their community to interact with them, but also gives them control over how that interaction happens.
Facebook and you have been blamed for a lot of things, whether you agree or not. Why should we trust you with AI?
Well, it's a loaded question. We have gotten blamed for a lot of things. And I mean, look, I take our role in all this stuff seriously, and I think we've tried to handle all this as well as possible. I'm not sure that it's all been fair, but like, I'd like to think that we're an important and relevant company, so I think the scrutiny is generally healthy. One of the defining things around open source is that anyone can scrutinize the work. And because of that, I think it just puts a lot of pressure to make sure that the quality of the work that you're doing gets better really quickly.
All right, that was Meta CEO and founder Mark Zuckerberg in discussion with Bloomberg's Emily Chang. You can catch that wide-ranging interview with Mark Zuckerberg, including a visit to his retreat in Lake Tahoe on The Circuit with Emily Chang at 6:30 p.m. Wall Street time on Bloomberg Television. Fascinating exclusive interview for Emily Chang there with Mark Zuckerberg up in Lake Tahoe. Let's switch gears to logistics, transportation. UPS still having some challenges. The UPS misses profit estimates amid heavy costs and uneven demand. Can't catch a break. Stock down double digits here. Lee Klaskow joins us, senior transport, logistics, and shipping analyst for Bloomberg Intelligence. Lee, again, another tough quarter for UPS. What's the story there?
You know, I think it's a lot of things. You know, they are seeing volume growth, which is good, but that mix of growth is not good. What they're seeing is their shippers trading down. So if you were going to maybe send something via air, maybe you decide to go on the ground, which is, you know, cheaper and lower margin. And then if you're using ground, maybe you're going to use one of their products like SurePost, which is like an economy product, which is cheaper and again, lower margin business. So you are seeing, you know, folks trading down. You're also seeing the mix of B to B2C outpacing growth of B2B. B2C growth was around 4% and B2B growth was down 4%. And B2B, so think like a lawyer sending documents to another lawyer's office, that business tends to have better margins because of the inherent density that follows that business. And density is really good for asset-intensive networks like UPS's. And then you also, you know, have another negative mixed impact You had two, they called out on their call, two large e-commerce companies. I'm assuming that, these are companies out of China that are, are kind of using more economy services. So you're seeing a surge in that demand from there, as well as addition to the trade down trade that that I mentioned earlier.
Is this the trough? Is this sort of the worst it's going to get?
It's a great question. I mean, I think so. I think it feels like this is the worst. I mean, the company has done pretty well in terms of meeting expectations or beating expectations. This is the first miss since, I believe, the first quarter of 2020. So, Carol Tomei and her team have been on quite a roll. They also have some easier comparisons going into the second half. Some of your listeners might have remembered they had a really, tough negotiation with their labor unions. They had a new contract that was really, heavily weighted in the first year. That gets anniversaried in August 1st. So therefore, those higher labor costs, the comparables will ease significantly, after August 1st. So that should provide a better cost for them in the third quarter and going forward. Also, peak season's here, right? A lot of the companies that we cover are talking about, most of them are expecting a real peak season. And we're not talking about, the peak seasons that we've seen in the 1990s or early 2000s, but you're definitely going to see seasonal increase in demand. And that peak season is one of the shortest on record. It's around 17 days between Thanksgiving and Christmas. And that will allow UPS to implement surcharges because they're going to have to, get those resources in a short amount of time to make sure that, they're able to deliver at high service levels. So you should see probably some good some good demand, revenue growth in the fourth quarter from those surcharges. So, that coupled with a lot of their cost-cutting measurements, they've reduced a lot of heads. I think a lot of things are going to turn for this company once you're going to see, that B2B volume return. And the company is doing a lot of things, I think, to position itself longer term, whether that's, focusing on the healthcare logistics. Obviously, there's a lot of value add there, and those margins are pretty high relative to, someone throwing a package on your porch. And so, they're really looking to grow that business, and they want to be a leader in that business. And to be frank, it's a fantastic business to be in if you're a logistics provider. And then, they're also trying to do new things with, or more things, I should say, with what we call SMBs, which are small, medium-sized businesses. That tends to have better margins than, dealing with these super large companies like Amazon, which, the business is good, but the margins could be better.
Right. I have absolutely no loyalty between these two companies. I mean, I have actually no loyalty between these two services. I mean, the FedEx store and the UPS store are kind of right next to each other in my little strip mall. So whichever's got the shorter line, that's kind of where I go. But boy, you look at the stocks over the last 5 years, UPS is up about 7% per year. FedEx is up almost 14%, so twice the stock price performance. So Lee, from an investor perspective, you got 30 seconds here. What's the difference between these two companies from an investor perspective?
Well, it's interesting. So like on FedEx, I think they're dealing with more structural issues because that was a company that I would say was extremely bloated, over the last decade, and they're kind of right-sizing their network. They're both making changes to their networks to kind of meet the new demands, that change of increase in home delivery versus, delivering to lawyers or doctors' offices or corporations. I think the biggest difference is, there might be more margin expansion opportunity at FedEx just because they're starting from a lower base than UPS. But these are two what I would consider blue chip companies that are, should benefit with the economy, and they should probably be able to grow top line well past global GDP, just given some of the self-help things that they have in front of them.
All right, Haley, super appreciate it. Thank you so much. Lee Klaskow, he joins us from Bloomberg Intelligence. He covers all the logistics and transportation stuff for us. Speaking of things on wheels, sure. GM stock is down over 6%, despite the fact that profits surged 60% from a year ago. Plus, we get Tesla after the bell today. What do we actually look for? I'm genuinely curious as to what I'm supposed to care about when it comes to Tesla, because doing so many things, I don't know what it's going to trade on.
Well, they're trying to reposition as an AI company,
Exactly.
a robo-taxi company. I don't know.
So is that what I care about? Do I care about gross margins? I don't know. You know who does? Kevin Tynan, Director of Research at the Presidio Group. He'll be joining us next. Coming up, Michael Barr with World and National News. Michael.
Thank you very much, Alex. Paul. John, Secret Service Director Kimberly Cheadle has resigned more than a week after the assassination attempt against former President Donald Trump. In an email to staff, Cheadle says she takes full responsibility for the security lapse. Henrietta Trays with Veda Partners says she's not surprised.
I'm surprised that it lasted as long as it did. The Secret Service has come under fire for years now, and I think in the wake of the attempted assassination attempt, which was so shocking to so many Americans, we haven't seen that, in my lifetime, is really something that required a shakeup at the top.
Henrietta Trays with Veda Partners was a guest on Bloomberg Intelligence. President Biden says he will name a new head of the Secret Service soon. Vice President Kamala Harris will launch her presidential campaign in earnest today with a rally in Milwaukee. She has secured the endorsement of nearly every major Democrat and announced a record-breaking fundraising haul of more than $100 million since Sunday when Joe Biden dropped out of the presidential race. Officials have released body camera video that reveals a chaotic scene in which a black woman in Springfield, Illinois, who called 911 for help, was shot in the face in her home by a white sheriff's deputy. The video shows a tense moment in which the former Sangamon County Sheriff's deputy, Sean Grayson, yells at Sonia Massey over moving a pot from the stove. He threatens to shoot her. Massey ducks, and Grayson fires his pistol at her 3 times. Massey family attorney Ben Crump.
He narrates that I'm going to shoot you in the effing face, and then he shoots her in the face. I mean, it's just troubling on every level.
Grayson has pleaded not guilty to charges including first-degree murder. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg.
Hits, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And I'm John Tucker in the Bloomberg Newsroom with this Bloomberg Business Flash. Stocks edging higher. It's been kind of a volatile day today. Traders waiting through the corporate results for any clues on whether the market's going to be able to extend the record-breaking rally we saw this year. United Parcel Service heading toward its biggest plunge on record. In fact, worst performing stock in the S&P 500 right now. The profit missing estimates, Tesla and Alphabet, they're going to report after the close. They're the first of the Magnificent Seven to open their books this season. Ian Shepherdson, the chief economist at Pantheon Macroeconomics, meantime, remains focused on the Federal Reserve. He says they should have started cutting rates months ago.
I think that the inflation picture is much better than they think. It's going to be way lower than the forecast that they made only back in June. So I think they start in September with 25. Then I think potentially we get another couple of moves before the end of the year, maybe 50 in November and December. And then I think they're cutting all the way through 25.
Disappointing forecast from NXP Semiconductors weighing on some of the chip makers. And another piece of economic puzzle, manufacturing in the mid-Atlantic states taking a turn for the worse this month. This is the Federal Reserve Bank of Richmond report saying its regional factory index dropped to the lowest since May of 2020. S&P 500, 18 points higher. That's up 0.3%, 5582 on the index. The Dow Jones Industrial Average, 76 points higher, and the Nasdaq 100 up 56 points. That's up 0.3%. Russell 2000, a smaller cap stocks, that's leading the indexes right now, up 1%. And we check the markets for you all day long right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker, and that is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and Alex.
All right, John Tucker, thank you so much. We appreciate that. Alex Steele, Paul Sweeney live here in our Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, streaming live on YouTube as well. Boy, you look at Tesla, the reporting after the close tonight. Stock year to date is absolutely unchanged, but that does not tell the story. I mean, through kind of the end of April, that stock had declined 50%. But since then, it's up 75%. So go figure. I think the market's trying to figure out what this company is here. Kevin Tynan, he knows. He's been covering the auto industry for decades. He's director of research at Presidio Group. Kevin, what are you looking for after the close here today when Tesla reports? It's kind of a mystery.
Yeah, well, the good thing, Paul, is that their throughput was above 100%, meaning they sold more than they produced for the first time in, several quarters. And what that does is, it helps margins, essentially. So what you've had is a lot of output, difficulty selling it, and that's very, that you're paying your cost of goods, but you're not booking any of that revenue as a direct seller. So what Tesla and all the direct seller and pure play EV companies need to do is to distribute everything that they produce. And that's been a problem. But most of them, or all three, Rivian, Lucid, and Tesla, were able to do it in the second quarter. Now, the way they get there is by cutting production. So while it helps in terms of cost of goods, revenue, your income statement, and even your balance sheet, because you're not carrying that inventory, as a growth company and trying to ramp your output, you're actually taking a step back. And I think Tesla's production in the second quarter was actually the lowest it's been since the third quarter of 2022. So tightening up the throughput, but at much lower production rates.
What is the main thing that I'm supposed to care about in earnings? So you're mentioning production and throughput rate. Then there's like AI stuff. It's trying to position itself as an AI company. There's robots that are going to make cars. There may be a robot that's going to drive a car. I mean, I'm legit confused as to what the multiple is trading on and what I should care about come 405.
Right. Well, that's exactly what you're supposed to think is as an automaker, right? Right, you're cutting production. So Tesla has the ability to distract in that way, to say, hey, there's all these other great things coming. We're not simply a metal bending automaker like everybody else is. We can do these other things. And that's what our valuation is based on. Because as an automaker, again, you're in this cycle where inventory is getting very frothy. and you need to cut production, well, now you're not a growth company, but you're not an automaker either, right? So you can point to these non-disprovables such as the robo-taxi business or full self-driving or whatever else is down the road that you can pin your valuation to that isn't really the nuts and bolts of auto manufacturing. And Ford, GM, Stellantis, basically everybody else doesn't have that benefit to distract to those other business units.
All right, you mentioned GM. The stock's down 6.7% today, but I thought that they're beat their numbers. So what's going on with General Motors?
Yeah, I mean, when you look at it, perhaps it's backing off the EV commitment a little bit. You know, if you look at some of that Tesla valuation being tied to the EV market and most of the legacy automakers kind of taking at least a half step back or extending the timeline in that. You know, but another one where GM's actually in a reasonably good spot, at least when you look at North America and the US, you know, not oversupplied. They did increase production in the second quarter by about 8%. So looking into the third quarter, there may be a little bit of price issue and profit margin issue because they are getting a little bit oversupplied, specifically in EVs. I looked at it just now, and there's about 150 days supply of EVs for General Motors. It's about 9% of their supply on the ground at the dealerships, but it only represents about 3% of their sales. So I think as we go through July and August, they're going to try and quietly sell that down and get that supply better aligned with demand.
Right. So then them pushing out production of the factory, the EV factory, like pushing that out in Detroit, et cetera, like this is good, right, for GM?
It is good, and it seems like it's being more acceptable to say those things and that it's not, you know, full throttle EV all the time. We saw the announcement from Ford about, you know, trading an EV factory for a Super Duty factory. So it's starting to be acceptable to say, like, and that's what the business is, and it always has been, right? It's that trade-off. You have some models or business units or regions that are deficient in terms of profitability, and the question is, where do you make it up? And we've sort of moved to this period now where the EV business is the deficient business. Also for GM, the Cruise unit was a significant loss in the quarter too. So how do you make that up? And for GM, Ford, even Stellantis, it's on the truck side of the business. And that's where it comes from. And it's starting to be acceptable to talk about trucks again.
So, Kevin, what's the updated consensus out of Detroit as to the timing of this transition to EVs? It obviously feels like we've hit a significant bump in the road and it's going to be delayed in this evolution. What's the current thinking out of Detroit?
Yeah, and I think there's been a little bit of a tailwind when you think about you know, what's happening with the election in November, right? So I think it feels like in Detroit that the pressure is off, that we have to get to these targets by these dates, that there's a little bit more room to stretch it out and to say, hey, we can do the profitable things right now and work our way towards the EV thing and hope that those profit dynamics level out a little bit at some point, but it's really a little bit of breathing room, I think, that the industry feels like it's getting. And again, there may be some more uplift in November, depending how the election goes.
Hey, Kevin, really appreciate it. It's so fun to chat with you. Congrats on the new gig. Kevin Tynan, Director of Research at the Presidio Group, joining us on GM as well as Tesla, what to look out after the closing bell. So what's happening here and now is LVMH ADRs are trading down by over 4%. You had their organic revenue rising just 1% in the second quarter. The estimate was for almost 3%, and the real kicker was the fashion and leather goods organic sales, just up 1%. The estimate was 2%. That's their bread and butter. That's the good stuff. And that sort of disappointed there. Their revenue was down year on year by about 1.1%. As we dig through, you have to wonder what this says about China.
What do they make again? All sorts of stuff.
Dior, Bulgari, Fendi, Celine, Marc Jacobs.
All the stuff that's in your closet.
Givenchy,
well,
Louis
no,
Vuitton.
don't they? The boots, the work boots. Didn't they take that over too?
Dom Perignon. Tagore, yes.
No,
Isn't
not
that
the
Tiger?
watch.
The
I'm
watches.
thinking
Oh, they're the watches. Just
I don't think they do work boots. I'm just guessing.
because I know they're putting their stamp on one of the work. Whatever. Okay. I'll do further
Luxury.
research.
You'd be right. It's about
We
China.
will get into that. But yes, this is definitely a China. The
Timberlands,
ADR is down
yes.
by about 5%. This is Bloomberg.
company news headlines on Bloomberg Radio.
And I'm John Tucker in the Bloomberg Newsroom with this company news update. I just want to update because I think people got confused. I said Timberland boots. They do have the LVMH stamp of Louis Vuitton, right, Alex? Because they had some sort of partnership.
And they have the band around the
They
top
don't
of the
own.
boots. They do not own Timberland, but you can buy your Louis Vuitton Timberland boot for about $81,000.
Oh, well, put that on my list. Apple working on a foldable iPhone that could be released as early as 2026. And in recent months, reached out to suppliers in Asia to make components for the device. This, according to people with direct knowledge of the matter. The phone would fold widthwise like a clamshell. That would make it similar to the Samsung Galaxy Z Flip, which was released in 2020. Apple is known to cancel projects late in the development, so there's no guarantee this is going to be released, a foldable iPhone. We're seeing more fallout from last week's global IT outage. The CEO of CrowdStrike being called to testify before a House Committee on Homeland Security. They do want answers, and CrowdStrike CEO George Kurtz will likely take a lot of heat. In a letter to Kurtz, members of Congress say in less than a day, we saw major impacts to key functions of the global economy, and Americans deserve to know in detail how this incident happened. Pharmacy trade groups pushing for state legislation to regulate pharmacy benefit managers, arguing that the PBMs are forcing community pharmacies to close across the U.S. including regions with few healthcare options. State legislative sessions, lawmakers have introduced more than 170 bills seeking to regulate the entities that manage prescription drug benefits. And that is a look at your company news.
This is Bloomberg Intelligence with Alex Steele and Paul Sweeney on Bloomberg Radio.
Happy Tuesday, everybody. I'm Alex Steele alongside Paul Sweeney and John Tucker. This is Bloomberg Intelligence Radio. We make sure you're up to date on all the business, financial, and economic news through our lens of our Bloomberg Intelligence analysts who coverage 2,000 companies in 130 industries all around the world. We also keep you up to date on world and national news with Michael Barr. Michael?
Thank you very much, Alex. Paul, John, the director of the U.S. Secret Service, Kim Cheadle, is stepping down from her post. Cheadle has come under fire from lawmakers on both sides of the aisle for her agency's handling of the assassination attempt on former President Trump. House Speaker Mike Johnson said it's a step in the right direction, but also says House lawmakers will continue to investigate the shooting and the Secret Service response.
I hope that the interim director or whomever is appointed to replace Director Cheadle will be very sober-minded about the responsibility and take into account the very dangerous times in which we live.
Cheadle yesterday was grilled in a House hearing that angered lawmakers. Vice President Kamala Harris has secured her place as the presumptive Democratic nominee for president. Bloomberg's Jody Schneider has more from Washington.
While the delegates who indicated the support are not required to back her nomination, this underscores how much of a hold she's got on the Democratic ticket this quickly. And those fundraising numbers are just pretty astounding given the amount of time, the short amount of time that took.
Bloomberg's Jody Snyder reports the Harris campaign raised more than $100 million since Sunday evening in the hours after President Biden left the race. Meanwhile, Donald Trump's running mate J.D. Vance held a rally in Radford, Virginia. Vance went after the current administration.
We'll fight to bring down the cost of groceries and housing. Isn't it a shame that our young people can't afford to buy a home in Joe Biden and Kamala Harris's economy?
J.D. Vance went on to say, while Biden is one of the worst presidents ever, Kamala Harris is 1,000,000 times worse. Israel's prime minister is in Washington to address a joint session of Congress for a fourth time later this week. It comes as the families of 8 American hostages held by Hamas met with Benjamin Netanyahu, urging him to reach a Gaza ceasefire deal now. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg. Alex, Paul, John.
Hi, Michael Barr. Thank you so much. We appreciate it. Well, the Olympics are coming up starting at the end of this week. Tennis, obviously, is part of the Summer Olympics. I saw a piece of news out there. Andy Murray announced he's going to retire from tennis after the 2024 Paris Olympics. And it kind of got me thinking, where does Andy Murray rank in terms of the men's game of tennis? I mean, he played against some of the all-time greats in Djokovic and Federer and all that kind of stuff. Molly Smith is the one to go to on this. Molly Smith, her day job, she is an editor for Bloomberg News covering the economy, but really she's our in-house tennis expert. Molly, in the game of tennis, you know, you're steeped in the game of tennis, both on the men's side and the women's side. Where does Andy Murray kind of rank?
Well, as you said, Paul, he's been right up there with Rafa, Roger, and Djokovic, really in like the primes of all their careers. Those three, often referred to as the big three, often drawn out to be called the Big Four, to include Andy Murray, because he is so much part of that discussion and in this really historic time for men's tennis. So it is really sad to see him go. You know, he's 37, been playing for almost 2 decades, and he's talked about this, that, you know, this year, unclear if he'd really play much beyond this summer. We just didn't know if that was going to include the U.S. Open, which is obviously coming up after the Olympics, or not. So it's sad to see him go, but he's just had so many injuries in recent years and is unfortunately just not the Andy that we knew of him at his prime.
How old is Andy Murray again?
37.
Okay, so is
old
that
in tennis years?
So that's old in tennis years. So who are the new young kids that I should pretend to remember for when I go to the U.S. Open? No, I'm kidding. I'm really going to go and I'm going to be really engaged.
No, I know you love these guys, Alex. This is so Carlos Alcaraz, who just won Wimbledon for the second year in a row. He is 21.
Wow.
And then we've also got Yannick Sinner, who's 22, who's the #1 ranked player in the world. There are a couple other guys who are in that, you know, early 20s discussion right now, but those are really the 2 biggest ones to watch. And then, of course, on the women's side, Coco Gauff being only 20 years old, and she's looking to do some real work on the hard court swing this summer and defending her title at the U.S. Open.
Molly Smith, thank you so much. We appreciate it. Getting a couple minutes from you. She covers all the economy for Bloomberg News and, of course, tennis. Balance of Power with Kaylee Lines from Washington, D.C. That starts right now.
From the world of politics to the world of business, this is Balance of Power. Washington, D.C.
Kamala Harris has basically locked up the Democratic nomination already. Welcome to Balance of Power. I'm Kaylee Lines in for Joe Matthew as we mark not even 48 hours since President Biden exited the presidential race. It didn't even take all of those, just roughly 36, for Kamala Harris to secure enough pledges from delegates to the convention next month that she can now be considered the presumptive Democratic nominee. This as she's hitting the campaign trail in Milwaukee today. We'll have more this hour with Bloomberg's Laura Davison, as well as Jim Kessler of Third Way and our signature political panel, Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzano. Plus, we're following some breaking news, the resignation of the Secret Service Director Kimberly Cheadle in the aftermath of the attempted assassination of Donald Trump last weekend. We'll have those details ahead for you as well. A lot to cover on this Tuesday. But first, let's get a check on the markets. Charlie Pellet has that for us up in New York. Hey, Charlie.
Hi, thank you very much, Kaylee Lines. We're looking at gains for the Dow, the S&P, and NASDAQ very close to session highs right now for the S&P. 5580 is where we stand, up 0.3%. We've got the Dow Jones Industrial Average up 101, up 0.2%. NASDAQ Composite Index up 68, gain there of 0.4%. The NASDAQ 100 Index up by about 0.1%. The Russell 2000 Index, though, by far the outperformer, up right now by 1%. Stocks are climbing as traders wade through a deluge of corporate results. The 10-year, 4.22%, with a 2-year right now, 4.49%. Spot gold up 0.3%. An ounce of the precious metal now at $24.04, up almost $8 the ounce. And West Texas Intermediate crude, $76.49 a barrel, down now by 2.4%. Lots of fast-moving political developments in recent days, including countless polls. So how is that playing out with markets? Dana Dioria is Co-Chief Investment Officer at Investnet.
The market actually is another mechanism for voting and voting with your feet. So and the market's a leading indicator. So I do think that, you do see movement in obviously some of these sectors and some of these individual country stocks even based on this. And I look there for more information than the polls themselves.
Dana Dioria of Investnet. We've got UPS, United Parcel Service shares, tumbling the most in more than 15 years after it reported a profit well short of Wall Street estimates. UPS shares, they are trading lower today by 13.4%. Rival FedEx down now by 2.1%. After the bell, big earnings news. Yes, we got you covered on both Tesla and Alphabet. Tesla down now by 1.1%. Alphabet up by 0.4%. Recapping stocks higher, S&P up 15, up 0.3%. Balance of Power continues. She is solo today. Back we go to Washington. And once again, here she is, your host, Kaylee Lines.
All right, Charlie Pellet in New York, thank you. Here in Washington, we have some breaking news to bring you. Bloomberg now confirming that 1 hour from now, at 1 p.m. Eastern time, the two Democratic leaders in Congress, House Leader for the Democrats, Hakeem Jeffries, and the Senate Majority Leader, Chuck Schumer, will be holding a press conference in which they will endorse Vice President Kamala Harris to be the next Democratic nominee. And of course, if they get their way, President of the United States. We have been talking at length about the racking up of endorsements and of money that Kamala Harris has gotten in just the last few days. It has now been just about 48 hours since Joe Biden announced that he was leaving the race. There had been notable holdouts, though, and these two were among them, the others being Barack Obama and his wife, Michelle, of course, a former president and first lady. But this is big news. So let's get to it now with Bloomberg's Laura Davison, Bloomberg politics editor, who is here with me in our Washington, D.C. studio. So, Laura, we knew this was probably going to come eventually. Pretty much everyone else in the party has gotten in line at this point. Why would Schumer and Jeffries wait until 1 p.m. when we had talk of them meeting with Kamala Harris first, and she's currently on a plane to Milwaukee as we speak?
Part of it is to just show that everyone is falling in line. Of course, last night she crossed the threshold of pledged delegates that she needs. There's really no mystery left in this now. So they are scheduled to meet with her later this afternoon after she gets back from Milwaukee. They had said yesterday that they would, kind of came out and said nice things, but they would wait to endorse until after this meeting. At this point, it's like, look, let's everyone get in line and lockstep behind the vice president. Of course, as you mentioned, the one person we are waiting to hear from is Barack Obama. It's anticipated that an endorsement is coming likely. It's not shocking that some of the top leaders in the party, like Pelosi, she also endorsed yesterday afternoon, have waited to the very end. Part of this is to make it, to show that, look, the party is deciding, and it's not a few people at the top that are sort of strong-arming the rest of the membership.
But once Schumer and Jeffries come in, and assuming Obama could come in at some point here too, does that effectively mean there is no room for a challenger, especially with the majority of pledged delegates saying that they will be voting for her in Chicago in 4 weeks?
There's basically no room for a challenger right now. It was clear, even 24 hours ago that there was very little window for a challenger. Part of this is she has the delegates. Of course, they're just pledged. They can change their vote. So there's, it's not never say never, but she already has the campaign apparatus. She's raised a ton of money. At 1 p.m., 2 p.m. on Sunday afternoon, it was going to be hard for someone to challenge Harris and the $96 million she was going into this race with. Now she's raised another $100 million more. A super PAC has also brought forward another $150 million. So at this point, unless someone has a major funder just on the money side, you can't even mount a credible bid at this point.
Yeah, the money story is an incredible one, especially because her campaign says more than 60% of those who have donated are donating for the first time this cycle, which does suggest there is an energy and enthusiasm for her out there. In the meantime, President Biden is still at this point sidelined with COVID. We, of course, heard his voice on a call when Kamala Harris was at the campaign headquarters in Delaware yesterday. He did call in to express his support for her, but he now says he will be addressing the nation prime time from the Oval Office tomorrow night at 8 p.m. What can he say now that this process has already gone so quickly? It seems like everything is already buttoned up nicely, and this is going to be the first time he's addressing his exit from the race when it does feel like everybody's already moved on.
Yes, and really, two things he can speak to of, one, what will his role be in the election going forward? He's told campaign staff last night that he plans to be fully engaged. He could give more details about what that looks like, and particularly, in terms of helping down ballot races where he helps. Of course, there's some members who have said they don't want to be anywhere near the president because it will hurt them in their districts. The second is, what is his plan? He still has 6 months left in office. What are the things he wants to do? This will be a little bit of sort of a pre-legacy writing that he'll do to sort of lay the path forward of, what he sees as his key value adds going forward and, kind of how he wants to exit the stage gracefully.
It'll be interesting to compare and contrast the LBJ Oval Office speech in 1968 with the one that President Biden gives tomorrow, as so many people have drawn parallels to those years. We've just got a headline crossing that Biden will be traveling to Austin, Texas on Monday. So he's getting back out there, whether or not that's a campaign event or an official White House event. Just quickly, Laura, the other news we're following today, the resignation of the director of the Secret Service. Obviously, there has been great political pressure on her. We saw that on display in the House Oversight Committee yesterday. The statement we got from the White House, though, didn't necessarily seem to be super supportive of the idea that she has resigned in the aftermath of this assassination attempt. What is going to be happening next in this saga, knowing that this has all gone down over the course of just over a week?
Yes, and in a very busy week for everyone involved. Really, the big questions are, how did this happen? And those investigations are still ongoing. But when you have a security breach like the one we had, where a bullet was inches, maybe centimeters away from a protectee's head, that is just a clear sign that the head of the agency can't stay in there, and there has to be a regime change.
And indeed, Kimberly Cheadle seemingly recognizing that today with this resignation. Laura Davison, Bloomberg Politics editor, thank you so much, as always, for joining us. Again, we're looking ahead to just less than 1 hour from now, the endorsement, finally, some might say, from Hakeem Jeffries and Chuck Schumer. They'll be delivering a press conference, and we'll be bringing some of that to you live here on Bloomberg Radio. First, though, as we preview it, let's turn to our next guest. Jim Kessler is with me now. He's a Democratic strategist and also Executive Vice President for Policy at Third Way. Also happens to be a Schumer alum, having worked for the majority leader for many years in the U.S. Senate. Jim, great to have you, as always. As we look ahead to what we might hear from Schumer this afternoon, can you also shed some light as to why he may have waited until this point to give Harris his endorsement?
I think this is because this is a choreographed event that we're seeing. So Biden resigns or says he's not running, endorses Harris. Harris starts gathering support. She wants to gather that support on her own, not just a bunch of smoke-filled room politicians. Today's the day where Schumer and Jeffries are going to make the announcement. There'll be other announcements. We'll hear from Barack Obama probably later this week. Each day that dominates a news cycle builds momentum for her. So I don't think this was reticence on the part of Schumer. This is just how you choreograph something to get the best benefit as possible.
Well, if we're thinking about choreographing benefits, Jim, it does seem like this process has unfolded remarkably smoothly thus far. You've gotten now pretty much every major Democrat in the party aligned. You've had over $100 million raised by the Harris campaign. She secured pledges from enough delegates to actually secure the nomination in 4 weeks. Are you surprised with just how quickly and seemingly flawlessly almost this entire thing has come together?
Kaylee, nothing surprises me anymore, okay? That's
Fair enough.
Yeah, this was done remarkably well. Look, this is a shot of adrenaline for Democrats. I mean, post-debate, it's hard to overstate how demoralized Democrats felt and how hopeless the situation was. And look, Democrats gave room for Joe Biden to have a couple of weeks to try and dig himself out of the hole of that debate. But a lot of folks, myself included, did not really think it was possible. So now there's Harris. Look, I think if Joe Biden in July of 2023 said he wasn't going to run, Harris would have been the nominee, probably an 80% chance of that. In July 2024, that went up to close to 100%. And you know, she just quickly, locked it up. All the other possible real contenders said no. And I think Democrats feel pretty good right now.
Well, she is already well in the throes of actually being on the campaign trail. She currently is on a plane heading to Milwaukee, Wisconsin, where I just was last week for the Republican National Convention. Now we're watching Milwaukee for an entirely different reason as she does this campaign event. How significant is it, Jim, that she chose to go there with her first real stop on the campaign trail in her very nascent presidential run?
Well, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Michigan are really of the utmost importance for Democrats. I think Wisconsin Democrats really feel should be theirs. She comes into this, but she's part of the Biden-Harris administration, and she is a mainstream Democrat, but she also, I think a lot of folks, Republicans, are going to try and portray her as overly progressive. This is her opportunity to show that, she's for the heartland of America, that, she's part of that Biden centrist agenda. So yes, these opening steps are very important because she is defined but not completely defined in the eyes of American voters.
Well, to that point, Jim, to what extent does she need to hold her experience with this administration close, and to what extent should some things be kept at arm's length, including, frankly, the president himself, who called into campaign headquarters while she was there yesterday, talked about how he would be joining her on the trail, even if he's not on the ticket. He said he'd be very engaged in the effort. How engaged, if you were advising the campaign, would you suggest that he should be? Could he actually hurt her if the ties seem too close, that bind?
I don't think so. Biden is popular, particularly among Democrats. The biggest issue with Biden was his age. If he was 71 years old, not 81 years old, he would be winning this race hands down. In public opinion polls, people say inflation was the #1 issue. No, it was the #1 policy issue. Biden's age was the #1 issue. This is a presidency, including its accomplishments and the economy, not perfect, but the economy is good, that would re-elect an incumbent. So I think she can grasp onto that, but she also has to show she is her own person, her own leader. She will take the country in her own direction. So look, there's a bit of a dance on this here, but Biden is an asset, unmistakably.
Well, and we're going to hear from the president himself tomorrow night, Jim. He says he'll be giving an Oval Office address to the nation at 8 p.m. Eastern time. We're going to get that primetime speech that he had promised in his statement that he posted on social media when he was announcing he was no longer seeking re-election. What do you expect we'll hear from President Biden tomorrow as he tries to tell the nation not only what he's going to look to accomplish in the remaining 6 months of his presidency, but in some ways has a chance to define what he wants his legacy to be?
Yeah, it's hard to overstate what a selfless act this is, deciding not to run for re-election. I know there was pressure even before the debate and certainly pressure outside of the debate. You don't get to be president of the United States because of not thinking of your own future and your own legacy. So my hope is that in this speech, the point that he'll make is, I felt that I had what it took to be president for another term, but I couldn't convince voters of that, and I have to accede to their wishes, and I'm going to fight for voters all the way through to the end. But I also feel this is kind of like an athlete, a Hall of Fame athlete, who announces their retirement, and you get celebrated. And I hope that's what happens with Joe Biden. He's had a remarkable career. He's had a remarkable presidency.
And considering that Harris is already on the campaign trail and all of this is happening before Joe Biden has actually had a chance to speak, when we hear from her and what we expect to hear less than 2 hours from now, how does she strike the balance of trying to recognize Biden and his legacy, not get ahead of his big address tomorrow, but also make the case for her own candidacy?
Well, look, I don't think she has to worry about getting ahead of Biden. She's out there making her case. You noted earlier, like, the money is pouring in, the energy is pouring in. Her job is to, show the American people that she can be president for the entire nation. That, she is part of that centrist Democratic legacy, that she will bring energy and vigor to the presidency. She will highlight some of the issues that are particularly dear to her, definitely choice and healthcare. And she also has to show the American people that she will be a good steward of the economy. She does not have a record previous to being in the White House of strong views on the economy that voters have heard. She now has 3.5 years of passing the infrastructure bill, the CHIPS Act, the Inflation Reduction Act, other pieces of legislation that have made it so that more Americans are working today than ever in history. The stock market is at an all-time high. Oil drilling in 2023 beat all records for the United States or any country. I think she has to tout those things as well.
All right, Jim, always great to have you here on Bloomberg. Appreciate your time. Jim Kessler, Democratic strategist and Executive Vice President for Policy at Third Way. Thank you. Coming up, we'll have more on the breaking news on the resignation of the Secret Service Director, Kimberly Cheadle, next, right here on Bloomberg.
Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. We have got stocks close to session highs. The Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ 100 index, all advancing. Dow Transports, however, are declining, down 1.5%. Right now, we got the S&P up 14, gain there of 0.2%. The S&P at 55.77. The Dow up 66, a gain right now of 0.2%, while the NASDAQ Composite Index is up 68, a gain there of 0.4%. 10-year at 4.22%, the 2-year 4.48%. Gold up $8 the ounce, up 0.3%, 24.04 right now. And West Texas Intermediate crude down almost 2%, 76.88 a barrel. Stocks are higher as traders wade through a deluge of corporate results for clues as to whether the market will be able to extend this year's record-breaking rally. Delta Airlines under investigation by government authorities after over its handling of a technology glitch that has led to thousands of canceled flights. Those cancellations, many continuing today. Delta Airlines, so little changed, up just under 0.1%. Earnings front and center after the close of trading, specifically big tech names. First of the Mag 7 will be checking in. Tesla ahead of earnings, down now by just about 1.7%. And Alphabet ahead of earnings, advancing by 0.4%. Again, recapping, S&P up now by 10 points, up 0.2%. Balance of power continues. Back we go to Washington. Once again, your host, here she is, Kaylee Lines.
All right, Charlie Pellet, thank you so much. At this time yesterday here in Washington, we were watching what was a pretty contentious hearing in the House Oversight Committee as lawmakers grilled Secret Service Director Kimberly Cheadle about the failures in security last weekend in Pennsylvania when Donald Trump was shot in an assassination attempt. She, of course, faced bipartisan calls to resign, and today she has done so, saying in an email to staff, "I take full responsibility for the security lapse. In light of recent events, it is with a heavy heart that I have made the difficult decision to step down as your director." For more on this, Ellen Gilmer is joining us now. She is Bloomberg Government's Homeland Security and Immigration reporter. So, Ellen, we do know now that the director of the Secretary of Homeland Security, Alejandro Mayorkas, has renamed an acting Secret Service director, Ronald Rowe. What else is going to happen next now that we at least have someone acting in place?
Well, the new acting director, Ronald Rowe, is obviously going to have a lot on his plate immediately. So he's somebody who's been with the Secret Service for nearly 25 years in a lot of leadership positions. And a lot of what he's going to be doing now is talking with lawmakers, talking with investigators from the whole universe of investigations that has started looking into this. There are independent reviews. There's an internal review. And he's going to have to try to restore confidence in the Secret Service. Obviously, the next bigger step would be to name a permanent to name a next director. There are some senators who want that to be a Senate confirmed position, which it is not right now.
So when we consider what role Congress has to play in this, even if they don't have to do the confirmation process, yesterday in that Oversight Committee hearing, she was pretty adamant, it seemed like, that she was not going anywhere, that she wasn't stepping down. Do we have a sense of what exactly changed in just the last 24 hours that led to her resignation this morning?
Well, I think it was clear during that hearing that she didn't have confidence or support from either side of the aisle, and it's really hard to help an agency, doing such a critical task as a Secret Service, navigate this kind of public scrutiny and these investigations with somebody who doesn't have the support of all of the decision makers in Washington. So I think it was really just a matter of time. She did the hearing. She made her case. She explained as much as she was willing to explain about the events of July 13th. It wasn't enough to win anybody over, and that was clear by the end of the day.
Well, Ellen, as you talk about the role it could play in disrupting perhaps the investigation process, where does that go next? I'm sure it's ongoing right now as we speak, as this assassination attempt was only 10 days ago. But do we have a sense of how long it is going to take that process to wrap up entirely?
There are so many different investigations happening. A few to keep track of. There's one independent review that Biden ordered immediately after the assassination attempt, and that's being done by former government officials who've served in Democratic and Republican administrations, including former Secretary Janet Napolitano and others. That has a 45-day timeline. That's what they've committed to. Separately, the Secret Service is doing an internal review that's supposed to take 60 days. At the same time, of course, Congress is investigating. House Speaker Johnson just is putting together a task force that the House is going to vote on this week. That'll be bipartisan. There's no timeline that they've committed to yet on that, but I expect they'll aim to work quite quickly. And then, of course, the FBI is investigating the particulars of the day and doing a criminal investigation.
All right, it's a lot of moving parts, and I'm sure it's a lot to cover. Ellen, thank you so much for joining us as we dissect this breaking news on Cheadle's resignation. We appreciate it and look forward to continuing to see what comes of your coverage as these investigations move forward. Ellen Gilmer of Bloomberg Government covering Homeland Security for us. Now, we also want to continue on with what is, frankly, our top story today, which is the rapidly evolving narrative around Vice President Kamala Harris, now seen as the presumptive Democratic nominee, after locking up the necessary amount of delegates to actually win the nomination at the convention just 4 weeks from now. But we want to look even further ahead, as Harris looks like she will be leading the Democratic ticket and up against Donald Trump in November, as to what markets should be watching for policy-wise if she actually could be president of the United States, or at least what they should be expecting to hear from her in terms of rhetoric on the campaign trail over the next several months. For that, we turn now to Nathan Dean. He is Bloomberg Intelligence Senior U.S. Policy Analyst based here in Washington, joining me in studio. So Nathan, you actually have a piece out on the Journal about this that looks into a variety of different sectors. I guess if we just take it from the highest level, if there is an area in which there is just status quo, Biden to Harris, not much changes on a Venn diagram, and then in the other part, things that could change dramatically under a potential Harris administration and areas in which maybe there's some degree of overlap. Is it largely more status quo than it is brace for disruption?
Yes, we think it's mostly status quo for a lot of industries, from banks to EVs to big tech and so forth like that. And we actually had an internal discussion about this, and one of our consensus is that when President Biden became president, his policies more gravitated to where Vice President Kamala Harris was, as opposed to Vice President Harris's policies gravitating where President Biden's stance is. But I will say, if you're looking at banks, one of the things that we've been looking at, look for a little bit more focus on consumer protection, look for a little bit more focus on lower to middle income protections and so forth like that. But really it comes down to tariffs, trade, and then a lot of regulatory actions after that.
Well, it strikes me on that note that we shouldn't maybe just be thinking about, okay, how would Harris differ from Biden, but how much realistically would Harris differ from a Trump-Vance administration, especially on things like tariffs? We know that both Donald Trump and J.D. Vance are fans of protectionism, if you will. We also have heard from J.D. Vance pretty kind words for competition regulators in the U.S., praise for Lina Khan at the FTC. He seems to be supportive in general of antitrust efforts. So are there actually more ways in which the Republican and Democratic ticket may align on policy than you might think at face value?
Yeah, so let's talk about the technology aspect first with the antitrust. Senator Vance obviously gave praise to Lina Khan here at a Bloomberg event here in the office a couple of months ago. And, we don't think that's going to change all that much. This idea of economic populism is going to remain at the FTC, DOJ, probably no matter who wins the election. So if you're in the technology sector, that's certainly that you're going to have to live with now, and you're probably going to have to live with in the future. When it comes to tariffs, don't forget that when Senator Harris was around, she voted against the Canadian-U.S.-Mexico agreement. She voted against the TPP. Now, a lot of that was because of climate change concerns. And so we think that if Vice President Harris were to win, look for the Inflation Reduction Act to be boosted. But when it comes to tariffs, I think you're going to continue with this Biden strategy of targeted tariffs on specific industries to protect American workers versus this idea of 60% general tariffs on all imports coming from China. So I think, the Chinese rhetoric is going to be, tough no matter who wins. But I think that on the tariff strategy, more targeted in the Harris presidency, more broadly in a Trump presidency.
Well, and as we consider what Harris or Trump presidency can bring or might be able to bring. We also have to consider that it's very much going to depend on the balance of Congress and whether or not you have perhaps cemented control across both chambers or a split government, which makes it hard to get things done. What presidents do have power to do, though, is decide who they want at the helm of regulators. And I wonder to what extent you would expect that Kamala Harris would mean consistency in terms of who is actually at the top of these regulatory agencies, or if she might want to bring her own people in to pursue a little bit of a different kind of policy.
I think it's going to be a mix of both. I'm thinking of the SEC chairman, Gary Gensler.
Right.
I'm guessing,
so am I.
I think Chairman Gensler will probably stick around another year to 18 months if Kamala Harris wins. I think there's a lot of regulatory agency leaders who are like, look, I've been here for 4 years. Let's talk about a transition. So don't be surprised if you see, changing the guards. But I'm thinking of Lena Khanna at the FTC, Rohit Chopra, the director of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. Now that if they get a second term, they're going to run out of the gates, and they're going to say, look, let's run with this and see if we can actually get a little bit more of that consumer protectionism in place. Because remember, when Kamala Harris was Attorney General of the state of California, she participated in a $25 billion settlement against the big banks on foreclosure. So, but I would always caution, when you talk regulations, you have to remember the courts. Because as the Supreme Court has shown over the last month, it's going to be a lot more difficult to do rulemakings in the future. So always just keep that in mind.
Very good point. As we consider checks and balances here with Congress, there's also the check that can be provided from the courts, as that is the third branch of government, the judicial branch. Very, very quickly, though, when we think about 2025, what's ahead, tax debate is obviously going to be front and center. Considering a lot of the Trump tax cuts that need to be renewed do focus more on small businesses, on consumers, not necessarily the business tax cuts. Would Kamala Harris actually, as you talk about being more pro-consumer protection and the little guy, be supportive of renewing that, do we think?
I think so. Just remember, reconciliation comes into play. This is if the House, the Senate, and the presidency goes to one party. If that happens, you're going to see a broad tax debate. But I think ultimately you are going to see, a low, middle income, that individual tax cut that expires at the end of 2025. I think that's going to stay no matter who wins the presidency. It's going to be a little bit more tweaks on things like the SALT deduction, maybe a little bit of corporate tax issues that expired. But ultimately, I think the individual tax rates are going to remain very similar.
All right, Nathan Dean of Bloomberg Intelligence. We're going to be talking to you a lot, as we always do, as we move forward through this campaign cycle. Of course, we're expecting to hear from Kamala Harris just about an hour and a half from now as she campaigns in Milwaukee. So we'll see what kind of policy ideas she puts forward. In the meantime, though, let's get a check on world and national news. Amy Morris has that for us in our 99.1 newsroom here in Washington. Hey, Amy.
Hi, Kaylee. Secret Service Director Kimberly Cheadle has resigned after an assassination attempt against former President Trump at his campaign rally. There has been an intensifying outcry about how the Secret Service could have failed in its core mission. Cheadle testified yesterday on Capitol Hill.
The Secret Service's solemn mission is to protect our nation's leaders. On July 13th, we failed. As a director of the United States Secret Service, I take full responsibility for any security lapse of our agency.
Kimberly Cheadle had served as Secret Service Director since August of 2022. Vice President Kamala Harris has enough delegates now to receive the official Democratic presidential nomination. National Convention Chair Jamie Harrison told the Today Show that the nominees will have to be settled before the convention because of Ohio's ballot deadline on August 7th. Harris secured more than 1,900 delegate endorsements last night, and her campaign received $81 million in contributions in the first 24 hours after President Biden exited the race. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Amy Morris, and this is Bloomberg.
1240 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. We've got stocks struggling to find direction with the S&P 500 index. Right now, little change, has been swinging between gains and losses. 1 point gain right now, up less than 0.1%. The Dow in the red. That's changed since our last update, down 48 now, dropped there of 0.1%. While the NASDAQ Composite Index higher by 23, up by about 0.1%. And the NASDAQ 100 Index also turning lower, down now by about 0.2%. The Russell 2000 Index of small cap shares holding on to a gain today of 0.7%. Bottom line here, we've got stocks struggling to gain much traction as traders wade through a flood of corporate results. They're looking for clues as to whether the market will be able to extend this year's record-breaking advance. 10-year, 4.22%. The 2-year, 4.49%. Gold up 0.3%, 24.04 the ounce. And West Texas Intermediate crude right now lower by almost 2%, 76.88 a barrel. Bitcoin down 2.7%. Existing home sales tumbled in June. And with that story, here's Bloomberg's Vinny Del Giudice.
We're looking at the fourth straight monthly decline and the slowest sales pace in more than a decade. Dwelling prices set another record amid the highest interest rates in 2 decades. The number of homes on the market is low by historical standards. Existing home sales account for the majority of U.S. home sales and are calculated when a contract closes. We'll get data on new home sales on Wednesday. Vinny Del Giudice, Bloomberg Radio.
Among the companies out with earnings today, we're looking at UPS plunging after earnings, down 13.7%, heading the other direction after earnings. General Electric, GE, up by 7.3%. The big events after the close of trading, Tesla down now by 1.7%. Alphabet ahead of earnings, up by 0.4%. Recapping stocks are mixed. S&P holding on to a gain of 0.5 point. Balance of power continues now. Back we go to Washington once again. Here she is, Kaylee Lines.
All right, Charlie Pellet, thank you so much. I am indeed Kaylee Lines in Washington. Joe Matthew is taking the day off today, and I would point our listening audience to the fact that about 20 minutes from now, we are expecting to see some movement on Capitol Hill from the 2 Democratic leaders of each chamber. The Democratic leader in the House, Hakeem Jeffries, and the Senate Majority Leader, Chuck Schumer, are expected to hold a press conference right at the top of the 1 p.m. hour Eastern Time and endorse Kamala Harris for president. They, of course, would follow almost every other significant member of the Democratic Party doing so in the last 2 days in the aftermath of Joe Biden stepping out of the race. But it's not just the endorsements that we are following. It is also the money. Vice President Harris's campaign says that in 36 hours since its launch, they raised more than $100 million. More than 60% of the donors contributing were doing so for the first time this cycle. The money is telling an incredible story here, so it's on that note that we assemble our signature political panel. Rick Davis of Stone Court Capital and Jeannie Shanzano of Iona University, both Bloomberg Politics contributors, are with me now. Rick, could you have even dreamed about this kind of money?
Yeah, this is really phenomenal. When we had a good day in the McCain campaign, something exciting happens. We'd raise $1 million overnight, and we're like, wow, $1 million. This is incredible. Now they're saying things like $100 million or 224 hours. I mean, it's really phenomenal amounts. But think about the incredible inflation of political spending. We didn't get to $1 billion in 2008, and now some people are expecting this campaign to exceed $3 billion, all spent on the presidential campaign. So there's been a lot of political inflation going on in addition to our domestic inflation.
Well, that's an excellent point, Rick. Everything does seem to be more expensive these days. But Jeannie, obviously $100 million, especially when you're adding that on top of a pretty significant war chest that she inherited from what was the Biden-Harris campaign. This is a lot of money to spend. What's the smart way to spend it?
Well, I just want to tell Rick, if he was running a campaign now, he would have done this easily. So, it was several years ago. It is remarkable. I agree with what Rick said. I think in particular, the fact that they're reporting that 60% of these donations come from first-time donors, that is remarkable. It is evidence of the enthusiasm. It is evidence of how frustrated Democrats were just a week, 3 weeks ago. And now they are feeling this, sort of uplift, this excitement and a feeling that this is something that they can do, and the money is following that. And so I think number one, what they're going to use it for is obviously advertising. The vice president, as long as she's been in public life and as long as she's been vice president 3 years now, there's still a substantial number of Americans who weren't particularly familiar with her. And so she needs to reintroduce herself. She also needs to contrast herself with Donald Trump, importantly, and to show for all the things that they have been saying about Joe Biden's age. She is the young one. She is the one in favor of freedom to use your body. All of those things she wants to contrast herself with. So a lot of advertising, and of course, the all-important get out the vote drive that she talked about yesterday, knocking on doors and making phone calls.
Yeah. So, Jeannie, with all of the money funneling toward Harris right now, all of the endorsements for that matter, frankly, a majority of the delegates who will ultimately be charged with making her officially the Democratic nomination in Chicago just weeks from now, all of that is behind her. There's no more room for anyone else to even try to contest this nomination now, is there?
There is not. I am hesitant in this 2024 election that you and I have lived through together, Kaylee, to say never say never. Wouldn't happen, inevitable. But at this point, it would be stunning if somebody came out and challenged her. I don't know, just in the money, in terms of the support, in terms of this really well choreographed dance of endorsements that the Democrats, I am stunned to say, have really managed quite smoothly and well. You're hard pressed to imagine, barring something shocking, that anybody would come out and challenge her on the Democratic side. So this is hers at this point to lose. And the big question now is, who does she take along with her as VP? And of course, we've seen some auditioning on that score over the last couple of days.
Yeah, indeed. We understand that the likes of Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro, North Carolina Governor Roy Cooper, Senator Mark Kelly of Arizona, all are being vetted. That's who the three of us have discussed as being potentially on the short list for VP as well. This is actually something that I spoke about with Larry Sabato of Sabato's Crystal Ball, of course, the UVA Center for Politics last night. This idea that not only is it about who could potentially bring electoral votes in, but also how quickly the nation may need to get comfortable with whomever this is that could join Kamala Harris on the ticket. And this is what Professor Sabato told me.
Get people used to the ticket before you actually go into the convention. Make those days count, because Kamala Harris, even though she's been vice president, she's not well defined. People don't follow what a vice president is doing. And so she needs to define herself, and her selection as vice president is going to help define her in a major way.
So, Rick, I'd love for you to weigh in on that, knowing we just saw Donald Trump not picking his vice president until the Monday of the convention in Milwaukee. How much time realistically does Kamala Harris have to make this choice?
Yeah, that's the best part about academics versus practitioners, right? I mean, they like to have it very neat and tidy, and practitioners are like, hey, I don't have time for that. We're going to have to, push forward. And that really is the situation now. There's very little time. Kamala Harris is going to have to establish her image on the run. And the good news is, in 1 month, she's got a fantastic venue to do it, from a convention speech. Millions of Americans will watch her really for the first time as a national leader, not an understudy. And in the meantime, the clock's burning. She's doing diligence on these candidates for the vice presidential slot that you described. And I would say all of them bring a little bit of something different, but they all come from states that are competitive swing states. And so, the basic, get on first base, who are we going to pick? Well, they ought to be from a targeted state. Bingo, she's passed that test. The transition from being the understudy to the principal, I think yesterday told us significantly she's passed that test. And now it's like, what is the constituencies going to look like that are different to Biden? It is not the rule of thumb in politics that you get whatever Biden has. She may be more attractive to young voters than Biden was, and yet she also may lose steam with voters over 60, because Biden had extraordinarily good numbers, and those are what really drive outcomes in the blue states of Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. One of the reasons why Wisconsin today is such an important event.
Well, exactly, Rick. We're expecting just over an hour from now, we'll hear from Kamala Harris at a campaign event in Milwaukee, where we all were there for very different reasons last week. How much time should she be spending in these just 4 weeks between now and the convention in Chicago on the trail in swing states like this? Or does this really need to be about getting the team together and getting organized and really just kind of hunkering down and figuring things out because you're dealing with such a short window?
Well, she's got a team, and they seem to be very competent in the early executions of the transition plan, and she seems to be relying on them. This, for all we know, might have been a prearranged event for Joe Biden that she's just stepping right into, which would be ideal as far as resources go. But I do think going right back into the turf that Donald Trump just finished 4 days in, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, a key state in that region, is, I think, a really smart play by them. They're not timid to go right back into the fray. And I would say too, we had a lot of conversations with Mayor Chevy Johnson of Milwaukee when we were there covering the Republican convention. And I know that he is looking forward to having a different kind of dialogue, especially with Black voters in Milwaukee with Kamala Harris. She is going to bring a new dynamic to this race that he didn't have with Joe Biden. So I think this is really smart. So far, day two, it's looking very strong on the end of, focusing on the politics while all the Washington, games of endorsements and things like that continue unabated.
Okay, so this is how she's spending her time day two. Jeannie, as you alluded to earlier, she spent part of day one visiting campaign headquarters in Wilmington, Delaware. Of course, Joe Biden, the president, called in talking about how he will be with her through the campaign, even if he's not on the ticket. And we got remarks from Harris shortly after that, including this part of what she had to say.
As a young prosecutor, when I was in the Alameda County District Attorney's Office in California, I specialized in cases involving sexual abuse. Donald Trump was found liable by a jury for committing sexual abuse.
She went on, Jeannie, to talk about the kinds of people that she prosecuted during that part of her career, in which she basically said, to summarize her words, "I know Donald Trump's type." My question to you is, how hard should she be leaning into this image of being a prosecutor, knowing that for some voters that may be actually one of the things they find more problematic about her?
Yeah, I think the progressives in the primary did find this troubling about her, but this is now a general election battle for her, essentially, and this is something that is going to play well for her. I was looking back at some of her earlier ads against Trump in 2020, and this is something she talked about even then. I prosecuted sex predators, he is one. So that message is one that she's going to continue to push. Also, let's not forget, Donald Trump against Joe Biden, his main calling card was this strong man idea. He is strong, he is tough. And now you have a prosecutor known for asking really tough questions, being a really good debater, questioning Brett Kavanaugh when she was in the Senate. And she is going to take him to task in the same way to show the American public that she is strong and tough and up to the task of being president. So I think this notion of prosecution is one we're going to hear an awful lot about. And again, because we're not in a primary, the pushback she got from progressives on this point isn't going to play as well in the general, where people do want a strong president, and particularly those moderates, those independents and swing states where this race is going to be fought out.
All right, Jeannie Sheehan Zaino and Rick Davis, our signature political panel and Bloomberg Politics contributors, thank you so much for joining me. Rick and Jeannie, of course, will be back with me in the next hour of Balance of Power, as we are awaiting just minutes from now a joint press conference on Capitol Hill from the House Democratic leader Hakeem Jeffries and Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer. It's happening at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. They are expected to give, I would say at long last, although this whole thing has been pretty quick, their endorsement of Kamala Harris. This, of course, is part of what Rick and Jeannie were talking about, this seemingly very choreographed and orchestrated and rolling out of endorsements to keep them in the news cycle. We're expecting to get those from the senior Democratic leaders on Capitol Hill in just a few minutes' time. And then, of course, about an hour after that, just after the 2 o'clock hour Eastern, is when we'll hear from Vice President Kamala Harris as she makes that campaign stop in Milwaukee. So much more is still ahead in our second hour of Balance of Power. So stay right here and stay listening on Bloomberg.
politics to the world of business. This is Balance of Power. Live from Washington, D.C.
Well, that was fast. Welcome to Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. I'm Kaylee Lyons, solo here in Washington on this Tuesday, where we are now just 48 hours out from President Biden dropping out of his re-election race. And Vice President Kamala Harris already has secured pledges from enough delegates to make her the presumptive Democratic nominee. This as she campaigns in Milwaukee, Wisconsin today. And in just a few minutes, we are expecting her to receive a joint endorsement from the two Democratic leaders in Congress, House Democratic leader Hakeem Jeffries and Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, expected to give that endorsement in just minutes. We'll bring that to you when we get it. So we have a lot to cover. First, though, as always, let's get a check on the markets with Charlie Pellet up in New York. Hey, Charlie.
Hi, thank you very much, Kayla Lyons. Speaking of a lot to cover, right now we have got the Dow, the S&P, they are both negative. NASDAQ holding on to a gain. Choppy trading right now. Stocks fluctuating. Earnings season in full swing. S&P now lower by 1 point. Again, the key takeaway, little change right now. We've got the Dow Industrials down 35, drop now of just about 0.1%. NASDAQ, as I mentioned, higher, barely up by less than 0.1%. NASDAQ 100 index now down 0.3%, while the Russell 2000 index of small cap shares is advancing today, holding on to a gain, outperforming up by about 0.7%. 10-year 4.22%, the 2-year 4.49%. Gold up $8 the ounce, up 0.3%. West Texas Intermediate crude down 1.6%, 77.10 a barrel. Among the companies reporting today after the close of trading, Tesla down now by 1.8%, Alphabet up by 0.5%. Bloomberg Television Radio going to be all over these companies as they report after the close of trading. Among some of the other names out with earnings this morning, we heard from General Electric, GE up now by 7.6%. Also reporting today, we did hear from United Parcel Service, UPS right now down by 13.7%. Recapping, stocks are mixed. S&P little changed, up right now by 0.5 point. Balance of power continues. Lots going on in Washington. Once again, here she is, your host, Kaylee Lyons.
Lots going on indeed, especially in recent weeks. Charlie Pellet, thank you so much. I am Kaylee Lyons here in Washington with one eye on Capitol Hill as we await, as I mentioned, the joint endorsement from Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries, the two most senior Democrats in Congress, of Vice President Kamala Harris, who yesterday, after just about 36 hours at the effort, all but secured the Democratic nomination for 2024, getting pledges from enough delegates to support her in the convention in Chicago in just a few weeks to make her the presumptive Democratic nominee. This, of course, is ahead of what we expect in an hour to be her first real campaign speech in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, where she is today. So let's get into all of this now. Gregory Cordy is here with me. He's Bloomberg White House and politics reporter in our Washington, D.C. studio. So, Gregory, as we await the majority leader and House Democratic leader, I've been asking what took them so long, even though it's only been 2 days. But the answer I keep getting is this is choreographed. They're trying to keep the news flow positive, and it's just a trickling out of endorsements. Once they've done this, though, pretty much all the Democrats are in a line, right?
Yeah, I think there was also maybe a tendency among some of the senior leaders of the party not to rally too quickly around Kamala Harris, to have the momentum for her come from the grassroots, to not give the impression that this was a top-down party decision that was not in the hands of the delegates themselves. And so now that the delegates have largely spoken via, statements from state delegations or statements to the Associated Press and others, that she clearly has the delegates locked up for this nomination. Now it's free for every Democrat everywhere to rally around her as the presumptive nominee for all intents and purposes.
Well, and she's free to hit the ground running, as we basically have seen. She's going to be in Milwaukee just about an hour from now. The plane is in the air. How significant is it that she chose not just the swing state of Wisconsin, but the very city where we were last week for the Republican convention?
Yeah, look, I mean, Wisconsin is one of those states that is part of the blue wall, and I kind of think of it as the first link in the blue wall. It's the one that Democrats have to win first before they win anything else. Then they can think about Michigan and Pennsylvania, and then go on to find at least one other electoral vote somewhere else. But it starts with Wisconsin. Wisconsin has been reliably close every presidential election in recent memory. It's one of those states that could flip either way. It's on a razor's edge. And as you point out, the Republican convention was just there. Might be a little bit of a bounce of that. Candidates tend to get bounces from their convention, even more so when the convention is held in that battleground state.
Yeah, of course, we'll see how short-lived that bounce may have been, considering in the immediate aftermath, Joe Biden announced he was dropping out of the race. Again, this is a crazy news cycle we are all living in. So if we consider those battleground states, the blue wall states especially, that she's going to need to win if she wants to win the White House, those are probably states where we can also expect a great deal of money to be spent, I would imagine. And she's going to have a great deal of money to spend. $100 million raised in 36 hours, Gregory. Have we ever seen anything like this?
No, it's absolutely phenomenal. I mean, but we are in an age where fundraising is driven by social media and by email appeals. It used to be back in the day, you'd have to, send out a mailer, a donor would have to put their money in an envelope and send it back. Fundraising relies on these kinds of events to get the immediate kind of dopamine hit of donor enthusiasm. And we saw that throughout the last year. Every time Donald Trump got indicted or convicted, his donors wrote a check for him or clicked that donate button online. Now the enthusiasm is coming from the Democratic side, and just at the right moment, too, because Joe Biden had been spending a lot on ads in these swing states, had largely depleted that war chest. He had $96 million left over that he could pass on to Kamala Harris, but she's now doubled that in the span of 48 hours, which will allow her to hit the ground running with a new message, right? She's still going to be running on the Biden record, but she needs to now put her face on that message, and she's going to have to do that pretty quickly to define herself before Republicans can define her in a more negative way.
Well, we expect to hear from her just about 1 hour from now in Wisconsin. Gregory Korting, Bloomberg White House and politics reporter, thank you so much for joining me here on Bloomberg TV and radio. We want to turn now to a sitting lawmaker from Wisconsin. I'm pleased to say Democratic Congressman Mark Pocan of Wisconsin is here with me now, live from Capitol Hill. And, sir, we do want to get into what kind of message the vice president needs to be bringing to your state today. I do first want to note, though, that you were one of the dozens of Democratic lawmakers who had publicly called for Joe Biden to step out of the race. At the time, you co-authored a letter with 3 of your other colleagues that said, in part, passing the torch would reinvigorate the race and infuse Democrats with enthusiasm and momentum heading into the convention next month. Given what we have seen over just the last few days, is everything you hoped would come to fruition coming to fruition?
Absolutely. Joe Biden has done a tremendous job as president. We owe him a great debt of gratitude for all he's done, getting us out of COVID, getting the economy going. But there is no question what's happening right now is the energy we were hoping for that we need in a place like Wisconsin. Whoever's going to be president likely has to win Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. And having the vice president get out there, campaign not just on what she's done with Joe Biden and those things I just mentioned, but more importantly, what a vision forward is. That night of the debate, people didn't really connect with either candidate. Well, now they still don't connect with one, Donald Trump, and now they have a new, really a reintroduction of the vice president, and I think that's going to add a lot of energy.
Congressman, I apologize. We'll be back with you in just a few moments. First, though, your leader, Hakeem Jeffries, and Senator Chuck Schumer, the Senate Majority Leader, are speaking in a joint press conference. Senator Schumer speaking now, so let's listen in.
Unity. On Sunday, President Biden showed the world what a great man he is. His true patriotism, his profound sense of decency came shining through. We all know it was not an easy decision for him. But just as he has done in his entire life, President Biden's selfless decision not to seek the nomination put our country, our party, and our future first. At his core, he's just an honorable man, a family man, a man of deep faith. We love him. We truly do. I'll have more to say on President Biden later this afternoon in my floor speech. But President Biden's selfless decision has given the Democratic Party the opportunity to unite behind a new nominee, and boy, oh boy, are we enthusiastic. Since President Biden's announcement, we've seen the Democratic Party swiftly coalesce behind Vice President Kamala Harris. When I spoke with her Sunday, she said she wanted the opportunity to win the nomination on her own and to do so from the grassroots up, not top down. We deeply respected that, Hakeem and I did. She said she would work to earn the support of our party, and boy, has she done so in quick order. Vice President Harris has done a truly impressive job securing the majority of delegates needed to win the Democratic Party's nomination to be our next president of the United States. The vast majority of my senators quickly and enthusiastically endorsed her. So now that the process is played out, from the grassroots bottom up, we are here today to throw our support behind Vice President Kamala Harris. I'm clapping. You don't have to. It's a happy day. What can I say? Together, we will keep and hopefully grow the Senate majority, and under future Speaker Hakeem Jeffries, we will win back the House. Democrats are moving forward stronger and more united than ever before. In just the last 36 hours, I have seen a surge of enthusiasm from every corner of our party, uniting behind Vice President Harris. An enthusiasm felt in every corner of the country, and it's contagious among Democrats. The volunteers, the small contributions, they're just pouring in ways even beyond our expectations. Now, we all know that Vice President Harris has a tremendous record to run on. And now begins the next chapter in our quest to make sure Donald Trump does not become president. Today, with one voice, we speak about the dangers he presents to working families, to our country, and to our democracy. We see very clearly how nervous the Republicans are about our new nominee. Well, they ain't seen nothing yet. Last night, Vice President Harris secured a majority of delegates. Today, in Wisconsin and across America, we begin our next chapter, and it will be our best yet. Vice President Harris will beat Donald Trump and become the next president of the United States of America. Applause. Hakeem.
Thank you, Leader Schumer. Joe Biden is a patriotic American. Joe Biden is a heroic American. Joe Biden is a great American. Joe Biden will go down in American history as one of the most consequential presidents of all time. President Joe Biden has made the selfless decision to pass the torch to Vice President Kamala Harris, who is ready, willing, and able to lead us into the future. Kamala Harris and her candidacy has excited and energized the House Democratic Caucus, the Democratic Party, and the nation. Vice President Harris has earned the nomination from the grassroots up and not the top down. She is ready, she is willing, she is able to energetically and emphatically lead America into the future. Kamala Harris is a common sense leader who knows how to deliver real results for hardworking American taxpayers. Kamala Harris is a courageous leader who has worked hard throughout her entire career to keep our communities safe. Kamala Harris is a compassionate leader who will build an affordable economy that makes life better for everyday Americans. Kamala Harris will fight for our freedom. Kamala Harris will fight for our families. Kamala Harris will fight for our future. I'm proud to strongly endorse Kamala Harris to be the 47th President of the United States of America. We're going to hold the Senate. We're going to win the House. We're going to elect Kamala Harris as our next president in November.
Thank you. Yes. Well, questions on
All right, that was the House Democratic leader, Hakeem Jeffries, speaking alongside the Senate Majority Leader, Chuck Schumer, both of them giving Vice President Kamala Harris their ringing endorsements. Let's turn now quickly back to Capitol Hill, where Congressman Mark Pocan of Wisconsin has been very patient with us. Sir, thank you for bearing with us through that endorsement. Obviously, your party very much behind Kamala Harris, who is in your home state today. What message is it that she needs to bring to Milwaukee? What would win it for her?
Yeah, I think, in many ways, this is a reintroduction. People don't always deal with vice president as often as the president. We're close to the election, and this is really imperative for her to let the people of the country know what we know about her, which is her ability to be the president, that she has an agenda moving forward, that there's a huge difference between Donald Trump and his Project 2025 and the values of Democrats. I just saw a Wisconsin-based journalist just was tweeting that the amount of energy in the room in Milwaukee now compared to a few weeks ago in Madison is a distinct difference. And I think that's what you're seeing. People are excited that Kamala Harris is the nominee. They're excited about the prospects. And right now, it's the Republican Party that has the problem. They've got, one of the two people during the debate that people weren't connecting with still as their nominee. We've got someone that I think is going to be really great to be running in Wisconsin.
Well, of course, sir, you are not just a sitting congressman from the state of Wisconsin. You are also the co-chair and the co-founder of the Labor Caucus. So keeping in mind the act that Harris has to follow here, President Biden, who has called himself the most pro-labor president in history, and thinking about the labor votes that need to be secured, not just in Wisconsin, but the rest of the blue wall, Michigan, Pennsylvania. Is Harris as strong on labor? Can she own that in the way that Biden has?
Well, I think, she's been part of what Joe Biden has done for working people across the country. So she certainly has those cred points. But more importantly, when you look at Donald Trump's Project 2025, it wants to get rid of overtime in this country. I mean, it has extreme measures that would hurt working families in a place like Wisconsin, especially. And I think that contrast behind, the pro-worker initiatives that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris did versus the extremity of this extreme agenda from Trump's Project 2025. I mean, taking away overtime, your employer could make you work forever and never get paid extra. I mean, that's insane, and yet that's exactly what's in their agenda.
Congressman, in our final moment with you, it's worth noting that your district includes Madison. It's a college town. We've seen some difficulty for Biden during the primary process in places where there is a high concentration of young people, in part because of his policy toward Israel and Gaza. Is Kamala Harris the candidate to get that young vote back?
Yes. In fact, I was with a couple of UW-Madison college Democrats on Saturday, and they were talking about the difficulty they had right now with Joe Biden, but how different it would be if Kamala Harris was the nominee, and Kamala Harris is now the nominee. So I think, having to be able to kind of turn the page on that issue a little bit and having the new energy across the board is something that I see. And, we have a lot of university students in Wisconsin. I think it's something like 150,000 students. That's a lot of votes in a state where someone wins by 20,000 people.
All right, Congressman, thank you so much for joining us on Bloomberg today, and thank you for your patience as we got that press conference from your leader in the Senate Majority Leader, Congressman Mark Pocan of Wisconsin. We appreciate your time, sir. We have much more still ahead in Balance of Power this hour, so stick with me right here from Washington on Bloomberg TV and radio.
7:21 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. We have got a choppy trading session back in the green, barely right now on the S&P 500 index, right to the numbers. S&P higher by 1.5566 right now. Little change there. We've got the Dow up 7. Also little change. NASDAQ higher by 15, up by about 0.1%. The NASDAQ 100 index down 0.2%. The Russell 2000 holding on to a gain right now of 0.8%. Stocks are advancing. Earnings season in full swing. The 10-year 4.22%, with a 2-year 4.48%. Spot gold up $9 the ounce to $24.06, up 0.4%. And West Texas Intermediate crude oil down 1.5%, $77.20 right now for a barrel of WTI. Bitcoin down 3%, 66,065 on Bitcoin. After the close of trading today, we'll be hearing from both Tesla and Alphabet. Analysts will be listening for details of Tesla's robo-taxi service, while Google parent Alphabet is expected to see a sales boost from its cloud unit. Right now, Tesla down 1.5%, Alphabet up 0.5%. In the meantime, Delta Airlines under investigation over its handling of a technology glitch that has led to thousands of canceled flights. Delta shares today down another 0.4%. Recapping, S&P up 2 points, little change there, up less than 0.1%. Balance of Power continues now. Back we go to Washington. Once again, your host, here she is, Kaylee Lyons.
All right, Charlie Pellet in New York, thank you so much. I'm Kaylee Lyons in Washington. Welcome back to Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. Of course, 1 week ago today, we were broadcasting to you live from Milwaukee, Wisconsin, talking about Republican unity as they rallied behind Donald Trump and vice presidential selection J.D. Vance, while the Democratic Party looked rather ununified, with growing calls within it for Joe Biden to drop out of the presidential race. Of course, this week, he has now done so. And Kamala Harris, the vice president, now is the presumptive Democratic nominee after getting pledges from enough delegates to secure her that position at the top of the ticket come the convention next month. The question is now, how do Republicans wage a campaign against Kamala Harris? And how will it be different than the one they were waging against Joe Biden? We've already seen a taste from the ticket, J.D. Vance, the senator from Ohio, vice presidential nominee, talking about how Biden and Harris may be more of the same, while Donald Trump does seem to have resorted to calling her Lion Kamala, or at least in one True Social post yesterday, calling her, and this is a quote, dumb as a rock, Kamala Harris. Is that a winning strategy? I asked that of Larry Sabato of the UVA Center for Politics yesterday.
Being insulting is not a good way to go. They're going to have to take her very seriously. For one thing, she's much younger and more vigorous than Biden. The age problem is gone. There are other problems. There are always problems with any candidate. But the Republicans have to do a lot better than that.
So let's talk to one Republican now. I'm pleased to say joining me is Republican Senator Shelley Moore Capito of West Virginia. Senator, welcome back to Bloomberg TV and radio. Always great to have you. And you, of course, speak to us not just as a sitting senator, but someone who was in the Senate with Kamala Harris and actually, in fact, at some points crafted bipartisan legislation with her. What is the smart way for your party to tackle a campaign against her?
I think there's no question that the best way to campaign against the presumptive nominee is to look at the policies. The team is Biden-Harris. The policies are Biden-Harris. So whether that's immigration policy, economic policy with rising costs of inflation, whether it's the unsure international situation where we're looked at as in a weakened position because of the policies of Vice President Harris at the same time, crime in the cities. I mean, all of the things that Americans and West Virginians are upset about lay directly at the doorstep of the vice president. And so I think, in my view, attack on policies, attack on vulnerabilities in terms of the issues that I mentioned, and that's a winning strategy in my view.
Well, Senator, of course, Harris would not be in this position to compete for the presidency if it weren't for Joe Biden dropping out of the race this past Sunday. You yesterday put out a statement in which you basically questioned if his ability to continue on a presidential campaign is in question. What about his ability to continue on as president of the United States? You have called for his resignation. If he were to resign, though, that would make Vice President Harris president now. Is that what's better for the country?
Well, I think what's better for the country is to have somebody in charge who knows what they're doing, and that's what we're going to see in November when President Trump is reelected. So I definitely think that is a much better position for the country. But here's my concern. The president made a difficult decision to not continue campaigning. He's pretty much self-declared that he's not in a position to be able to do that. He didn't enumerate the issues, but we all know what they are. We saw them in full display at the debate. Those issues do not start on that one day. Those issues that the president has had have been going along over the last probably several years if you've had anybody in your family who's aged in this way. Vice President Harris has been right there with him. Why was she not making the American people aware? Why were they not working more hand in hand with the Congress to let us know what's actually going on at the White House? And so I just don't think 6 more months of President Biden is in our best interest. And these issues don't get better, we know that. And sometimes they spiral out of control. And so I just think the country in and of itself would be better without President Biden at the helm.
Does that mean, Senator, considering that President Biden already, even if he does not resign as you wish him to, and there's been no sign that he is intending to do that, as in his letter, he basically just said he intends to fulfill the duties of the president for the remainder of his term. Does that signal that even in the lame duck session after the election, you don't see anything that Congress and this White House led by President Biden could work together on? Are we not going to see any movement on, say, government funding or the debt limit or the defense authorization?
No, I think we will be moving forward here in the Senate on our appropriations bills. We'll be having some of those passed out of committee this week. I'm on that committee. And we have to have our spending. We either have to have a continuing resolution or something to the end of the year. Yes, I think that can continue. We need to reauthorize the National Defense Authorization Act. We will do that by the end of the year here in Congress, and the president will sign those bills, absolutely. But the question I'm asking is he really the one in charge here? I think all Americans are wondering that themselves. And so I just want a little honesty from the White House, from his biggest supporters, from his Democrat supporters here in the Senate, to be honest with the American people, to say what the situation has been. That's really not going to impact so much the election, except if there's a cover-up of what kind of challenges have been in the White House over the last several months. That's my question. This is not a personal thing to me, because I know the president.
Well, sure. And Senator, of course, you'd worked with him in bipartisan legislative efforts like the infrastructure bill earlier on in his term. Have you seen from your position in the U.S. Senate evidence that Joe Biden has not been the one in charge or making decisions or anything concrete, or that's what you're hoping might
I think these
appear?
Are the questions that need to, I think these are the questions that need to be asked. I mean, honestly, we just signed a nuclear bill into effect. The president just signed my nuclear bill. He just signed my national plan to end Parkinson's bill. So there are things that we're doing together. I just think these are questions, and I think it also lends to what kind of a candidate Vice President Harris is going to be. She's been in the White House. She's been witnessing everything that's going on. Let's just have a little honesty here.
Well, Senator, as we talk about your calls for Joe Biden to resign, it is worth pointing out we did get a resignation today, not from him, but from the director of the Secret Service, Kimberly Cheadle. Of course, she'd been facing a lot of pressure to do so in the aftermath of the attempted assassination of Donald Trump last weekend. Now that she has stepped down, what do you want to see happen next?
Well, the first thing we're going to have, and this is a bipartisan issue, and you see over on the House they've appointed a committee, we got to have transparency to actually what happened that day, where the fault lines were, how this could even, how a shooter could get that close, what were the protocols in place, who was actually performing the duties. I think those are questions that she couldn't even answer yesterday or would not answer. And so, you know, I'm sorry, the head has to fall when there's such a colossal failure, and I'm pleased that she resigned. So I think, first of all, we have to find out what happened, and then we have to make sure that it never happens again. And I think that's in everybody's shared interest. I don't think you're going to find a political shade to this investigation. I think it will be very straightforward down the line, and I look forward to those answers.
Well, I'm sure Donald Trump does as well. We just had a headline crossing the Bloomberg terminal, Senator, that Trump is looking forward to meeting Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu tomorrow at Mar-a-Lago. Before that happens, though, it is worth pointing out The Prime Minister will be addressing a joint session of Congress. He'll be there with you on Capitol Hill. What are you expecting to hear from him, Senator?
Well, I think that what the Prime Minister will do is he will reinforce to all of us in the audience, and I hope we have the full audience. We're not going to have the Vice President or the President. Senator Ben Cardin, a good friend, is going to be the one who's going to be presiding over this with the Speaker. But I think what needs to be reinforced is the long-time relationship that Israel and the United States have had, how we have been great allies, protectors of freedom, and they were attacked on October the 7th, and we are in lockstep with them in terms of helping them to weed out the terrorisms and the terrorists that attack them so brutally. So I'm sure he's going to reinforce the ties that bind us to Israel, and I think he should. And he should talk about where America has been great in Israel and where Israel has helped us as a nation, whether it's through intelligence or whether it's through innovation. Some of the innovations that we see are coming out of Israel are quite remarkable in small businesses. So I think we have a lot. I think he's going to reinforce where we have great agreement. I don't expect him, it could happen, I don't expect him to get belligerent or mad at the detractors. I don't think that's probably in either one's best interest. I think it's better to look at where we have such a strength of relationship with the country of Israel.
All right, Senator, thank you so much for joining us here on Bloomberg TV and radio. We appreciate your time. That is Republican Senator Shelley Moore Capito of West Virginia. Now, on the subject of the new U.S. Senate, a bit of breaking news for you. According to the New Jersey Globe, New Jersey Democrat, the Senator Bob Menendez, is going to be resigning from the chamber. Again, this is according to the New Jersey Globe. That resignation letter, they report, could come as soon as today, and it's been reported that that resignation will be effective August 20th. Bob Menendez, of course, has been indicted on multiple criminal charges about corruption, and there were a lot of calls for him to resign. Now, according to the New Jersey Globe, he does plan to do so. So we'll have more details on that for you straight ahead. First, let's get a check on other world and national news with Amy Morris in the 99.1 Newsroom here in Washington. Hey, Amy.
Hi, Kaylee. And as you mentioned, Senator Bob Menendez of New Jersey reportedly looking to resign from the Senate as of next month after his conviction on corruption charges. We're going to keep following that developing story for you. Vice President Kamala Harris has enough delegates now to receive the official Democratic presidential nomination, including from Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer.
From the grassroots bottom up, we are here today to throw our support behind Vice President Kamala Harris.
Schumer and House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries endorsing Harris, capping off the Democrats' swift embrace of her 2024 candidacy. The director of the Secret Service, Kimberly Cheadle, stepping down from her job following the assassination attempt against former President Donald Trump. Henrietta Trays with Veda Partners says that is not a surprise.
I'm surprised that it lasted as long as it did. I think in the wake of the attempted assassination attempt, which was so shocking to so many Americans, we haven't seen that, in my lifetime, it is really something that required a shakeup at the top.
Henrietta Trays with Veda Partners. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Amy Morris. This is Bloomberg.
It's 1:40 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. Just getting word that Southwest Airlines is facing heightened scrutiny by U.S. regulators over a series of flight safety incidents involving the carrier. FAA has launched an audit to review recent events. Right now, we do have shares of Southwest, ticker LUV. We got Southwest down by about 1.9%. Stocks continue to trade mixed. We have got the Dow Jones Industrial Average down now by 17, a drop there of less than 0.1%. The S&P 500 index also fluctuating between gains and losses right now. Little change on the day, up barely, up half a point. NASDAQ up 12, a gain there of 0.1%. 10-year 4.22% with a 2-year at 4.48%. Spot gold trading higher by almost $8 the ounce to $24.04, up by about 0.3%. And a retreat right now for West Texas Intermediate crude down 1.6%, 77.17 a barrel. After earnings, we've got UPS plunging the most in more than 15 years. UPS down now by 13.6%. Rival FedEx also lower today, down by 2.4%. Coming up after the close of trading, lots of earnings. We'll be hearing from Tesla. Tesla down 1.6% ahead of its earnings report. Alphabet shares, Alphabet parent of Google, up now by 0.5%. Again, recapping S&P down now by 1 point, little change there. I'm Charlie Pellet, and that is a Bloomberg Business Flash. Balance of Power continues now. And once again, your host, here she is, Kaylee Lines.
All right, Charlie Pellet, thank you so much. Welcome back to Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. We are counting down the minutes now, roughly 20 of them to go, until we hear from Vice President Kamala Harris and now presumptive Democratic nominee speaking at a campaign event in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I say presumptive nominee because as of last night, she had locked up the majority of delegates to the DNC in Chicago next month that she needs to actually secure the nomination. All of this happened very quickly, as did her gathering of endorsements, securing 2 more at the top of this hour from Hakeem Jeffries, the Democratic leader in the House, and the Senate Majority Leader, Chuck Schumer, who were emphatic in their praise of her. And of course, money is flowing to her as well. Her campaign said in its first 36 hours, it raised more than $100 million. All of this coming together very quickly as we await her remarks. But of course, we got a little taste already of Kamala Harris at the podium when she visited campaign headquarters in Wilmington, Delaware yesterday.
Predators who abused women, fraudsters who ripped off consumers, cheaters who broke the rules for their own gain. So hear me when I say, I know Donald Trump's type.
She also said in those remarks in Delaware toward the campaign staff that they're all here because we love our country. She said she believes in foundational principles and freedom and opportunity and justice and thinks that they are going to win. The question is, what's the winning message to bring to Milwaukee today? So on that note, let's assemble our signature political panel. Rick Davis of Stone Court Capital and Jeannie Shanzano of Iona University, both Bloomberg Politics contributors, are here with me. So Jeannie, when we hear from her just about 20 minutes from now, what does she need to say, not just to the people of Wisconsin, but frankly, the people of America who may be tuning in to what is going to be her first real campaign speech?
You know, I think she needs to show that she has the vigor, energy, intellect, background to be president, the strength. Certainly, I think she will highlight her background as a prosecutor, her time as vice president. I think importantly, she needs to show that she is going to be a good steward of the economy. That is something that people don't think about necessarily when they think about the vice president. And so that's going to be something she's going to have to convince people that she can do. And I've been going back and listening to how she contrasted herself with Donald Trump in 2020. And one issue on the economy that she talked a lot about at that point was housing. She said, he is owned by the big banks. I fought the big banks. I got $18 billion back for people who were victimized by the banks in terms of housing, while he was a slumlord. So she is going to continue to make the case that he is beholden to the big banks, wealthy donors, promising corporate tax cuts. And she is going to be a good steward of the economy and has the people, particularly middle and lower class people, on her mind.
Well, that does strike me, though, Rick, as a lot of the same kind of messaging that Joe Biden was trying to bring to the campaign trail in 2 swing states like Wisconsin. And we know how that effort was going for him. Since considering that Kamala Harris doesn't have the age issue, to Jeannie's point, she may seem more vigorous and energetic in this appearance. Is that enough? Is that actually enough to switch the balance in a state like Wisconsin?
Yeah, I would contend that it's probably a little less important, the actual issue set that she presents today, and more important that she pick a time, and maybe today's the day, to distance herself a little bit from the Biden agenda, whether that's on issues like foreign policy, national security, Gaza, or whether that's on taxes or EV policy. I mean, there's got to be something in there where she shows that she is independent, that she's not just the second term of Joe Biden. And I think Milwaukee's a perfect place for it. It's a battleground city. It's actually more Republicans live in Milwaukee than in any other single place in the state. And they're younger, they're more moderate, they're more diverse. It's the core of the Black and Hispanic community within Milwaukee or within Wisconsin. And so this is a really good choice to be in this place at this time. And I think being able to appeal to these voters who frankly have been a little disaffected by the Biden administration, whether it's their focus on only promoting union jobs or kind of shoving the EV policy down their throat, or, you know, being entangled in foreign affairs like Gaza and Israel. She's got a moment here, and she's used yesterday very well. Question is, how will she use today's speech?
Well, I want to tease out that one issue in particular you were talking about, Rick, when it comes to foreign policy in Gaza and Israel. We just got the headline crossing from Donald Trump on Truth Social that Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is going to be visiting with him at Mar-a-Lago in Florida tomorrow after he gives a joint session to Congress, which Kamala Harris will not be presiding over, though we understand she will be meeting with him separately this week while he's here in Washington. Jeannie, how does she handle this issue of Israel and Gaza, knowing, first of all, that her husband, is the second gentleman, is a Jewish man, but also that Joe Biden had a real problem with especially the youth vote when it comes to this issue? How does she need to be different on it?
You know, I think she is going to be, just by the way that she presents in terms of the work she has done in the past, she is going to continue to say that she loves and supports Israel, but that does not mean that every Israeli elected leader like Benjamin Netanyahu is somebody that she has to embrace. And so, you know, we saw 60 Democrats skip Netanyahu's speech 9 years ago. Many more are going to skip it this time. But the reality is so much of the hype around this speech has been quelled by the other news of the day that it's not quite as damning for Democrats as it has been. But, you know, she is going to have to walk a very fine line in terms of speaking with Netanyahu, but not attending that address and making her support of Israel, which is well known, continue to be put out front. And so I think she will be able to do that.
Well, Rick, as Jeannie talks about the very different reception that Netanyahu may get from Republicans and Democrats in Congress, it's also worth pointing out that we've had an ongoing conversation about how Republicans are going to message and around and campaign against Kamala Harris, being that she is not an 81-year-old like Joe Biden. She also is a woman of color, which may complicate some of the effort. Does Israel give Republicans an opening to attack her if she doesn't appear warm enough toward Netanyahu or toward the state?
Yeah, I think the first order of events is one that's, you know, particularly powerful with voters, and that is how soft the Biden administration's been toward Iran. And there are a lot of people who believe that without Iran's support, Hamas, Hezbollah, you know, the Houthis, they wouldn't be in the position they're in to inflict so much destruction and pain on the Israeli people. So I think that's number one. I mean, will she repudiate, you know, the nuclear agreement with Iran? It doesn't look very smart now to have had that in place for the short period of time that they supported it back in the Obama administration. So kind of tag some of these Obama-Biden foreign policy decisions onto her, let her defend them if she can, or you know, distance herself from them. She's in a unique position to say on many of these occasions with foreign policy, I wasn't in the room, wasn't my decision. I'll keep my own counsel as to what I would do, but as president, I will make my mind up independently of anything any previous administration did. So she's got some options there, and it makes it harder for Republicans to pin her down.
Well, I'd like to just focus on one Republican for a moment longer. Trump is now correcting himself, saying that his meeting with Benjamin Netanyahu will be on Thursday at Mar-a-Lago. So joint address to Congress here in Washington, presumably meeting with Kamala Harris tomorrow, Wednesday, and then Netanyahu goes to Florida on Thursday. The other thing we have to look forward to tomorrow evening, Wednesday evening, and prime time is the address President Biden will give from the Oval Office, the first time he will really speak to the nation since his decision to drop out of this race. In fact, according to the White House press pool, they just got their first eyes on him since then because he has been recovering from COVID. He is on Air Force One. He told reporters when he was asked how he was feeling that he's feeling well, and he is now en route back to Joint Base Andrews, back to Washington, where, of course, he will be giving this speech tomorrow night. Jeannie, given everything that has transpired between when he put out that statement on social media saying that he wasn't running to now, with a party that has almost seamlessly coalesced around Vice President Harris, what tone do you expect him to strike with this address tomorrow night? Is it going to be in part a campaign speech for Harris, or is this really about trying to cement and define his legacy as he is now effectively a lame duck?
You know, I think it's going to be three things. To your interview with the senator just moments ago, I think he is going to be out there to show Republicans who have been calling on him to potentially resign from the presidency or to be impeached or removed via the 25th Amendment that he has recovered from COVID and is healthy to continue the next 5-6 months. I think he is going to talk about his full-throated support for Harris and how he's going to engage in the campaign going forward. And then I think we are going to see what's he planning to do for the next 6 months in office and how does that, you know, coalesce with his legacy. But I think we heard it from Schumer and Jeffries and other Democrats and many Americans, regardless of party, about how much love and support there is for Joe Biden, 50 years of service. So I hope he does take a little bit, it's premature, but a little bit of a victory lap on there and talk about what he has done and this selfless act of stepping aside and turning to his vice president because the voters demanded it. And I think he's going to take something, hopefully, of a victory lap on that.
Well, Rick, I'd love to get your perspective on this as well as we consider what the legacy of Joe Biden will be and whether or not there are some things he could take victory laps on when he still is facing so many questions about his ability to just continue to sit in that office. How would you advise someone to message around that?
Yeah, I think you really have to ignore the sort of public discussion of his fitness for office. He's got 6 months to go. He's up until the time he withdrew, there were not calls for him to resign. A lot of calls for him to get out of the campaign, but not to withdraw from the presidency. And I think you just go about your business. I'd say the advice I'd give him would be the advice I'd give any elected official who's under this kind of scrutiny is just do your day job. You know, show up every morning, do your job. You know, hold the press conferences when you need to, make the decisions the way you want to, and make sure the office of the presidency functions. And frankly, in his case, don't get distracted by the politics of the day. You should feel liberated by the fact that you're no longer the candidate. And I think if he does that in a very short period of time, people will realize, okay, you know, we're barking up the wrong tree. He's not going to be on a ballot in November. Vice President Harris will be. And if Republicans were smart, they would spend a lot less time on Joe Biden, where they've invested an enormous amount of time, money, and energy to define and begin the process of defining the vice president.
All right, Rick Davis of Stone Court Capital and Jeannie Shanzano of Iona University, Bloomberg Politics contributors, our signature political panel. Thank you for being with me here on Bloomberg TV and radio as we look ahead to President Biden's Oval Office address expected at 8 p.m. Eastern time tomorrow. But of course, before we can get there, we do expect any minute now to hear from Vice President Kamala Harris, now presumptive Democratic nominee, as she speaks at a campaign event in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Of course, a key swing state that she has decided to visit as she kicks her campaign off in earnest with a number of endorsements, securing just within this last hour the endorsements from Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries. We have our eye on what the Obamas may do in the coming days. And of course, this is where you can find all of the latest. We'll have much more on the late edition of Balance of Power at 5 p.m. Eastern Time. In the meantime, Bloomberg Business Week is just ahead. They'll be taking Harris's remarks, and I'll have more on that for you in just a few minutes on Bloomberg TV and radio.
is Bloomberg Business Week. Insight from the reporters and editors who bring you America's most trusted business magazine, plus global business, finance, and tech news as it happens. Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Masser and Tim Stenevec on Bloomberg Radio.
And a very good afternoon, everybody, live on radio, TV, YouTube, Bloomberg Originals. This is Bloomberg Business Week. I'm Carol Masser along with Tim Stenevec. Let's get to the setup on this Tuesday. July 23rd. And yeah, first of all, we are really all in when it comes to earnings, Tim.
Yeah, we certainly are. Close to a third of the S&P 500 at market cap is reporting this week. Two big ones, Alphabet and Tesla, reporting after the bell today. We are going to bring you those numbers as soon as we get them.
It's almost the whole market cap of the S&P 500.
Yeah,
I'm kidding.
The Mag 7 has that effect, but you know.
Exactly. Still important and can certainly change sentiment. We're going to get into that. Ahead of that, though, we've also got to talk about UPS because it's tumbling the most ever following earnings on a profit miss and soft demand. Some comments from the CEO. We're going to break it down. What does it say about the company? What does it say about the global economy?
Plus, politics certainly top of mind as well. This as Vice President Kamala Harris launches her presidential run. She's got a rally in Milwaukee set to begin in minutes. We're going to bring that to you live as soon as she starts.
Yep, we're looking at that live shot, and it looks pretty crowded right now, so we'll wait for her to step up to the podium. Also, a Bloomberg exclusive on Jamie Dimon's handpicked Wall Street duo. We'll get into that. It is our most read story on the Bloomberg today.
And one more thing. How about a foldable iPhone?
I'm in.
What do you think?
Full transparency.
Okay, well.
I need a new phone.
You want it to be foldable?
I don't know.
All right, have you seen the price?
I don't know.
All right, the information is reporting that there's going to be a foldable phone. We're going to give you the details a little later in the program. I don't know.
Tick, tick, tick. All right, first up, let's get an update on the trading day, folks, and some of your top business stories. Let's turn things over to Charlie Bell.
All right, I thank you very much. Happy Tuesday to you both. You mentioned Apple. We got Apple shares advancing now by 0.5%. This market, though, really struggling for direction, struggling to gain traction. Yes, key earnings after the close of trading, but right now we have got the S&P little change, swinging between gains and losses, up now by 6 points, an advance of about 0.1%. Dow Industrial is up 25, now up by about 0.1%. And NASDAQ, the composite index, higher by 0.2%. Interestingly, we've got the NASDAQ 100 index in the red right now. That index trading lower by just under 0.1%. But the Russell 2000 keeps on going, up another 1% right now. 10-year 4.23%, the 2-year 4.48%. Gold up $8 the ounce, up 0.3%. West Texas Intermediate crude oil down 1.8%, $76.95 a barrel. Carol mentioned UPS, the stock plunging after earnings, down 13.6%. Rival FedEx lower as well, down by 2.2%. And the big events after the close of trading today, Alphabet and Tesla ahead of earnings. Tesla down 1.5%. Alphabet ahead of earnings, up by 0.8%. Complete coverage as those numbers drop on Bloomberg Television and Radio. Again, recapping stocks higher. S&P right now up by 7 points, up 0.1%. I'm Charlie Pelleton. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Another busy Tuesday. All right, Charlie, thank you so much. Well, just about 1 hour ago, in a show of unity, the two most senior members of the Democratic leadership, we're talking about Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer and House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries, endorsed Vice President Kamala Harris for president. Now, as for the VP, she will launch her nascent presidential campaign in earnest today in just a few minutes. Just a quick live shot we can show you of the group that are in Milwaukee. It's a rally that she will be holding. It's really seeking to answer some of the biggest questions on skittish Democrats' minds. There are some questions. How does she plan to beat Donald Trump? Well, one way is unifying the party. Vice President Kamala Harris speaking at Democratic campaign headquarters in Delaware. This was yesterday.
So in the days and weeks ahead, I, together with you, will do everything in my power to unite our Democratic Party, to unite our nation, and to win this election.
That's Vice President Kamala Harris yesterday at a campaign headquarters in Delaware. With more, let's go to Washington, D.C., where we find Bloomberg Balance of Power co-host Kayleigh Lines joining us from our bureau there. Kayleigh, all eyes certainly on Kamala Harris. It's been a whirlwind few days as she kicks off her campaign today, and the president does leave Delaware to head back to Washington after isolating for COVID. What's top of mind for you?
Well, just how quickly all of this has come together, Tim. It's been 48 hours, essentially, since Joe Biden announced that he was leaving the race, no longer seeking re-election. And in that time, we have not only seen Kamala Harris securing the endorsement of not just him, but pretty much everyone else in the Democratic Party, cemented by Hakeem Jeffries and Chuck Schumer joining the chorus just an hour ago. But we have also seen her secure the majority of delegates to the Democratic Convention in Chicago next month that she needs to secure the nomination, which makes her effectively, as of last night, 36 hours after Biden left the race, the presumptive Democratic nominee. Then you have to consider the money as well. Her campaign said in those first 36 hours, it raised more than $100 million. That is really unprecedented for any period in presidential politics as short as that. The campaign also said more than 60% of those who donated were doing so for the first time this cycle. So that really speaks to the kind of enthusiasm around her candidacy that the money is telling you. And certainly you can see on display in that room in Milwaukee, where it does indeed seem quite crowded, and the poll report suggests it's quite energetic. And the fact that she's already on the campaign trail in a key swing state is really telling as well. She wasted no time getting up to Delaware yesterday. Now she's taking her message to Wisconsin, which is part of that blue wall of states, Wisconsin, together with Michigan and Pennsylvania, that theoretically she needs to win the nomination, or not the nomination, but the election in its entirety in November.
Kayleigh, what must she do out of the gate today?
Well, in part, she needs to bring her message to the people. We were just speaking about this in the last hour with Rick Davis, who, of course, has run a few presidential campaigns of his own. This idea that in some sense today, she not only needs to talk about what kind of policy she would want to pursue as president, but the ways in which she may be different than Joe Biden, knowing that Republicans are very much going to try to tie her to everything Joe Biden has done and the issues that come along with him. She may have some opportunity here to dictate the ways in which we may see a different kind of policy pursuit under what her administration would be. So she does have a chance to do that. She also has a chance to speak to a few constituency groups that are key. In Milwaukee, you do have a high concentration of Black and Latino voters. Of course, you have a concentration of young people nearby in Madison. All of these are part of that coalition that elected Joe Biden in 2020, and that she is going to need to try to piece back together here in 2024 if she wants to win, knowing that a lot of those voters had strayed away from Biden over issues like Israel and the ongoing war in Gaza. And of course, that's something that she's going to have to try to figure out how she wants to address as well.
Gotta say, Kayleigh, I know you and Joe talk about it a lot. Joe Matthew, Tim and I talk about it a lot, the double haters and where they end up ultimately, where, you know, these are a group of voters here in the United States that, as you well know, did not like President Trump. Former President Trump did not like President Biden as their choice, hence double haters. That's part of what she needs to win over. What is it going to take to get them in her camp?
Well, there's the question, Carol, of how much those people may already be willing to join her camp, just because it is another option that isn't Trump or Biden. I think no one really has a way to estimate what that effect could actually look like, because we haven't really been in a position like this before. Remembering the last time we saw a sitting president eligible for a second term leaving the race was back in 1968 with Lyndon B. Johnson, and that was much earlier in the process. Here we are in July, just 4 weeks out from the convention, and that's when all of this is going down. So we have to consider that. On the idea of when this could show up in polls, I would caution that it is likely going to take some time for this actually all to filter in to an electorate that probably is only just now starting to really pay attention to what the architecture and the characterization of this race actually looks like. For all the talk of me and Joe here in Washington and those like us who live and breathe politics every day, it still is a bit early for the average American to be tuning in. So the fact that they may be now starting to do so as it is around convention time does give her a chance to define herself at a moment in which it is likely that more people are engaging in the political process than they were just a few months ago. And on that point, I would note we are just over 100 days out from that election. It doesn't give a lot of Republicans time to try to define Kamala Harris either. So this creates obviously challenges for her very new candidacy. She doesn't have a lot of time to try and convince the American electorate that she deserves to be elevated to president, but it also is probably causing a scramble in Republican circles as well, as they try to figure out how to message around her candidacy, knowing she isn't 81 years old like Joe Biden was. She's only 59. It kind of removes the age issue. And because of the historic nature of her candidacy, she's not just a woman, but a woman of color. They're going to have to figure out how to navigate attacks against her as well.
We are awaiting Vice President Kamala Harris speaking in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. We see the governor of Wisconsin, Tony Evers, taking the podium right now as we do await the vice president kicking off her campaign. We'll bring you her comments as soon as we get them. Hey, Kayleigh, we did hear Carol talk about Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer and House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries endorsing Vice President Kamala Harris to be the nominee, to be president. Who is missing at this point? Who are the notable voices that have not yet endorsed her?
Really, the only ones we're still waiting for are the Obamas. That would be, of course, former President Barack Obama and former First Lady Michelle Obama. They are too late to this process, although this is kind of in keeping with pattern in that former presidents don't really like to weigh into anything that could be perceived as a primary process, not put the thumb on the scale until the party has coalesced around one individual as the nominee. But now that this has happened, it wouldn't be surprising to hear from them in the coming hours or days on Harris's candidacy. I would point out that when we got that endorsement from Schumer and Jeffries just over 1 hour ago, even Schumer suggested that the reason they had held off is they wanted to see that there was going to be the support of the delegates for Kamala Harris's candidacy. Again, she has the majority of the pledged delegates saying they will support her in Chicago, but there was some wariness among the top levels of the Democratic Party about this appearing like just a coronation, like they were just anointing Vice President Kamala Harris, who didn't earn any votes throughout the primary process. 99% of the pledged delegates went to Biden, so they didn't want this to look like they were just choosing someone and not letting this play out in a process that is democratic. So appearances do matter here, and that may be factoring in to the former president and his wife.
As we wait for the vice president in Milwaukee, Kaylee, the other thing we are waiting is a speech by President Biden, expected to be tomorrow evening.
Yes.
What are you hearing about that?
Well, this is going to be a big moment. Of course, President Biden promised that this was happening in that statement that he put out on social media on Sunday. He did say that he would be explaining his decision to leave the race to the American people later on in the week, which is where we will arrive tomorrow. He, of course, needed to recover from COVID-19. His doctor today just saying he has done so, which is why we have now seen the president boarding Air Force One from Delaware, heading back to Washington, getting set to make this primetime address to the American people. This is going to be a bit complicated for him because, of course, on the one hand, he is now officially going to be a one-term president. So he is already effectively a lame duck. Part of this will be telling the American people what he would like to do with this lame duck part of his term, what he might want to accomplish within the next 6 months. Part of it also may be about defining his legacy, talking about what he has accomplished already, trying to cement how he will be viewed in history by the American people when it comes to legislative accomplishments like the infrastructure bill, the CHIPS Act, the Inflation Reduction Act, those kind of things I wouldn't be surprised to hear about from him. But then we were talking about this with strategists during Balance of Power over the last few hours as well, this notion that this may in part turn into a campaign speech, not for himself as he is no longer on the ticket, but for who he chose to be his vice president, Kamala Harris. How does he push the country toward her candidacy and advocate for her in this speech? So he's likely going to be trying to accomplish many different things here when he speaks to the nation, knowing that this is likely a very difficult personally time for President Biden, as he was just effectively pushed out from his own party.
Hey, Kaylee.
Or by his own party.
What role do you think he takes over the next 100 days in the campaign of his vice president, in the campaign of Kamala Harris? He said he'll do whatever it takes. He said he'll do anything it takes. But at the same time, it seems like the vice president wants to a certain extent, put some daylight between her campaign and the administration. Yeah. So it's a tricky line.
It is, and I would point out, Tim, that it frankly at this point is not really entirely President Biden's call. He will have to participate in this campaign to the degree that Kamala Harris wants him to. You, of course, are alluding to the remarks he made when he called into campaign headquarters in Wilmington, Delaware yesterday, while she was there. The first time we had heard his voice since he announced that he was leaving the race, in which he did say, even though I'm not on the ticket, I will be actively engaged in the process. He talked about being part of the campaign for Harris. The question really is going to be, to what extent does Kamala Harris want to embrace that, and to what extent may she want to keep Joe Biden at arm's length, knowing that there will be the difficulty for her of navigating the idea that because she was part of his administration, all of the issues that come with it, be it the economy or the border or even Israel and Gaza, are going to be attached to her in some way. So if she wants to create some distance between the kind of policy she would pursue as president versus what Biden pursued, that relationship could only realistically be so close on the campaign trail. So this is definitely going to be a tricky one to navigate. Areas in which you could see them work together may include, I would speculate, things like when it comes to the labor movement, when it comes to unions, knowing how important that is in those blue wall states, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and of course, Wisconsin, where she is today. Joe Biden has cast himself as the most union-friendly president, labor-friendly president in American history. So she may try to align herself more with that kind of policy, but it's going to be a tricky dance to do for these next 100+ days.
All right, we're dancing a little bit too as we await for Vice President Kamala Harris, expected to make her really first rally here. and she's expected to step up to the podium at any moment, but really kicking off officially, if you will, her run for the White House. As we've been talking with our Kaylee Lyons, who's been covering this, kind of feel like nonstop for the last 48 hours, as she mentioned. A lot has changed for the race come November, but we are expecting her to step up at any moment. Having said that, you know, the other thing we are thinking a lot about is who's going to be her running mate. There is a rather long list. We'll see if we get any clues. Right now, we're watching the Wisconsin governor, Tony Evers, stepping away from the podium at that rally in Milwaukee. Quite a large crowd there. As we know, this is an important state for the upcoming race in November and the ultimate outcome. So we are anticipating the vice president to step up at any moment. In the meantime, you know, Kaylee, as we await for her to do so and see what she says specifically, we are thinking a lot about who might be her running mate. Are we getting any clearer picture of who that might be?
There is an understanding of what this short list could be, Carol. The prevailing notion is that she is likely going to pick someone from a swing state, thinking about the Electoral College here, wanting to secure those votes that would get her to 270 to win the presidency. So the names that we keep hearing include Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro, North Carolina Governor Roy Cooper. I had a congressman from North Carolina, Wiley Nickel, on with us yesterday who was strongly advocating for a Harris-Cooper ticket. And then, of course, it could come from within the halls of Congress, and Senator Mark Kelly of Arizona. That is another name we keep hearing a lot about. Of course, a former astronaut, the husband of Gabby Giffords, who was the subject of gun violence at the time that she was serving as her own term in elected office. So there could be some attractive qualities to that candidate. But really, it's going to be about how does this vice presidential selection help balance out the ticket and make it more attractive when it comes to the electoral map, knowing that we're really just talking about a handful of swing states here. I've mentioned the blue wall a few times now, but you could also consider that the Rust Belt, whereas someone like Mark Kelly would be considered more the Sun Belt, or Roy Cooper for that matter. Those were states that it really looked like, when we were looking at polling consistently, Joe Biden was going to have a much tougher time of winning. His whole hope was in the blue wall, but Kamala Harris may have a chance to really look at some of those Sunbelt states and potentially target them too, in addition to these other blue wall states that she is going to want to capture. So that's really where we're all focusing our attention right now. There has been reporting already that Eric Holder's law firm is doing the vetting of those three, but of course there's always the potential for surprise. You never know anything until you know it, and I think the last few weeks has certainly taught us that lesson.
Speaking of surprises, Kaylee, it's fair to say, I think, that the Trump campaign and many other people were surprised over the last 48 hours to Sunday afternoon when we got that notice from President Biden that he was stepping aside. How has the strategy of the Trump campaign shifted just in the last 2 days, as it seems like Kamala Harris has really sucked the wind, at least out of the media cycle, post-RNC for the Trump campaign?
Yeah, it certainly isn't a very elongated post-RNC bump, because they all left Milwaukee, and just days later, Joe Biden left the race and completely upended that news cycle. I would say you're seeing different approaches depending on what part of the Trump campaign that you're talking about, or really Republicans as a whole. Donald Trump himself has seemed to resorted back toward the kind of name-calling type of behavior we've seen in a succession of True Social posts, him calling Kamala Harris, quote, lion Kamala. He has also referred to her as dumb as a rock Kamala, but both he and his vice presidential nominee, J.D. Vance, have also talked about this notion that essentially Joe Biden and Harris are one and the same. To paraphrase their words, they're basically arguing that Kamala Harris was up front and signing off on every single decision Joe Biden made. I heard much the same when I spoke with Republican Senator Shelley Moore Capito of West Virginia in the last hour. She was effectively making the argument, too, that everything Joe Biden was, Kamala Harris also is, because they were together as president and vice president for the last 3.5 years. So that's likely the attack line that they're largely going to go with, knowing that the age issue is one that has now been taken away from them. Kamala Harris is only 59 years old. That makes her almost 20 full years younger than Donald Trump. So it no longer is the questions of age and acuity that haunted Biden, and frankly are still haunting him, as some are calling for his resignation now that he has left the race. But that kind of strategy isn't going to work. And again, as I mentioned earlier, we do have to consider that the vice president here is a woman, and she is a woman of color. And, and the degree to which Republicans attack her may be colored in and of itself because of who she is, and the idea that if they don't want to turn off independent voters, people that they still may have a chance to capture, knowing that the base Trump voter is still with them, if they want to bring those other people in, they're going to be probably have to be very, very careful with how they do that.
So many interesting aspects, certainly, to this race already. All right, Kaylee Lyons, we're talking with, of course, co-host of Bloomberg's Balance of Power. We do want to get back to the markets right now.
Yeah, we certainly do. We see Tammy Baldwin, senator from Wisconsin, at the stage right now in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. As we do await Vice President Kamala Harris, we'll bring you her comments as soon as she starts speaking. In the meantime, let's get a check of the trading day. Here's Charlie.
All right, I thank you very much, Tim and Carol. Indeed, stocks struggling for direction, but right now higher across the board. The Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ in the green. S&P up 6, higher by 0.1%. Has been swinging between gains and losses. 55.71 right now on the S&P. We got the Dow up 70, up 0.2%. NASDAQ up 32, a gain there of 0.2%. Russell 2000 index of small cap shares, the outperformer, up now by 1.1%. Cannot ignore the NASDAQ 100 index, full of big tech names. It is down now by just under 0.1%. 10-year 4.23%. The 2-year auction saw record investor demand. 2-year yield 4.48%. We've got spot gold trading higher by 0.3%, $24.04 the ounce. West Texas Intermediate crude down 1.6%, $77.17 a barrel. Lots of earnings, as you well know. Coca-Cola up by 0.7%. Rival PepsiCo, it is down 0.6%. Kimberly-Clark shares, they're down 4.7%. And after earnings, Spotify up by 11.5%. Briefly, one additional political note. Sources tell Bloomberg Senator Bob Menendez of New Jersey has told staff that he does intend to resign after a chorus of fellow Democrats demanded he step down following his conviction on federal corruption charges last week. Again, recapping, S&P up 7, higher by 0.1%. And that, Tim and Carol, is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, thank you so much. You're up to date on the markets. Of course, some big earnings after the closing bell, as you know, so we'll be all over that. Having said that, we are, of course, awaiting Vice President Kamala Harris in Milwaukee, a rally, really her first in her run for the president. Right now, we have Wisconsin Senator, I should say, Tammy Baldwin, making some comments. She's leaving the stage, so we're going to wait and see if ultimately who we see next up on that stage is the vice president. And then we will, of course, take you there for her comments. In the meantime, Reuters out reporting about a recent poll, a Reuters Ipsos poll finding basically that Vice President Kamala Harris opening up a marginal 2 percentage point lead over Republican Donald Trump. This is after President Biden ended his reelection campaign and passed the torch to her. The poll was conducted on Monday and Tuesday and followed both the Republican National Convention, where Trump, as you know, on Thursday formally accepted his party's nomination, and then, of course, the Biden announcement just over the weekend, on Sunday, excuse me, where he was leaving the race and endorsing Harris. So that's coming up. Our own Gregory Cordy has also done some reporting. He certainly tracks a lot of the polling that we do here at Bloomberg.
Yeah, the polling is notable now because it has only been 48 hours since we did learn that President Biden planned to leave the ticket, and over the last 48 hours, Vice President Kamala Harris has taken to the top of the ticket following getting the delegates late last night, according to the Associated Press. It's notable, though, Carol, because polling tends to take a few days to do and a few days to analyze. So there weren't any polls that showed in recent days what type of lead or what type of lead Kamala Harris or Donald Trump had post this announcement. There was lots of polling done in the last few months about a potential matchup between Vice President Harris and former President Trump. But those polls can be flawed because the idea is that that hasn't actually been announced yet, so voters don't necessarily think the same way as somebody who is actually going to be on a ticket.
Yeah, so it's interesting. But so this is a poll, a national poll, right, that kind of does show that Harris has led Trump or is leading Trump 44% to 42% in the national poll, a difference within the 3 percentage point margin of error. So just something.
And it's also not a swing state poll. This is a national poll.
Exactly.
So we live in a, in an electoral system that uses the electoral college. So it's not the popular vote.
It's not the popular vote.
It's only the electoral college.
I will say what many folks have been saying is that this is going to be still a very close race, right? And it is going to come down to the electoral college and who probably wins those key swing states. But again, early in the going, we still have, over 100 days to go until we all